We're on the brink of nuclear war right now. He stole millions of dollars of the CIA's money and transferred them into secret accounts in Switzerland. What time is it, English? He's going to invade the country. We didn't think he'd take the whole country. Billy was a bona fide American hero. Billy, I said, where you been? And he looks around to make sure nobody's nearby, and she looks around and she goes, where is everybody? We're the only ones left. You can either stay in the world or go back. You can never have any contact ever again. And just as the words came out of my mouth, the second plane hit. This guy was a terrorist powerhouse. He actually had to be resuscitated once after a waterboarding session. His heart stopped beating. You never popped your cherry that way, did you? And the president, it was George H.W. Bush. He says, well, now what do we do? And everybody turns and looks at me.
John, the Archbishop Kiriakou. So nice to see you. Thank you so much for being on the Not A Grayman podcast.
Thanks for the invitation.
Nice. And I saw the chuckle there when you heard the Archbishop. We're going to go back to these really exciting days. I'll begin with a introduction of you, but really nothing will do justice to the amount of contribution that you've had in the world and in civil service. 15 years with the CIA. Mm-hmm. And then you went on into the private sector, did some private intelligence for a while. Mm-hmm. And then you came out of the shadows and became known for standing up against what is colloquially known as the torture program. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. You are the author of 9 books, 10 books?
8 books.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this first one, Doing Time Like a Spy. That's was
my favorite one.
Yeah, it's fantastic. The Convenient Terrorist, which recounts the capture of Abu Zubaydah. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, some insider guides from a CIA operator's perspective.
And these were commissioned. These and one called the CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis.
So I start the podcast usually with giving a gift. And what do you get somebody that is just so unique like yourself? I started thinking like long and hard. And then, the old adage, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Uh-huh. Well, rumor has it that the thing I'm about to give you, you may have ended up putting it in storage, or you're planning to donate it or something. So that's your first hint.
I know what it is.
Second, well, let's see your skills. Hold it and tell me if you think you know what it is.
Oh, maybe not. It's heavier than I thought.
Okay.
No, I don't know. It's heavier. Should I look?
Well, take a guess.
I thought it was going to be an Abu Zubaydah t-shirt. I mean, a SpongeBob SquarePants t-shirt.
Well, open up and let's take a look. He's good, you guys. He's good.
It is. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, my gosh.
This is an early Christmas gift for you, John.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Awesome.
I appreciate it very much.
So
there's a story behind it, of course. We'll get into.
Happy Thanksgiving. We just celebrated Thanksgiving. And how was yours?
Quiet. It was good.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do you prefer quiet Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I do. My mom used to have these big bashes where everybody in the family, I have 27 first cousins on my mom's side. Wow. And so everybody who was in the area would come. And it was a day-long thing. Wow. And I kind of prefer to just do it quietly.
Yeah. So like the outskirts of Pennsylvania kind of thing?
Yeah. Amish country in Pennsylvania.
That's cool.
It was awful.
We also just had the election, and the Amish, they had such a turnout. Did you hear about this in Pennsylvania?
I didn't know they voted.
They generally don't. The Amish don't vote, but apparently they went out in troves because the regulatory environment, something to do with like their inability to sell milk, unpasteurized milk.
Oh, of course.
And
that's
so
a big issue for them.
It's a big issue. It's such an important piece of their economy. And there was so much regulation, and it was overly punished if they sold the unpasteurized milk that it became such a problem that they all went out and voted.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah. I'm proud of them. I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was a thing on Facebook during COVID. During COVID, people were putting, questionnaires on Facebook, just for fun, to distract their friends or whatever, where did you meet your significant other? What was your first date? Stuff like that. And somebody put, admit to a prejudice. And I said, all right, I'm prejudiced against Amish people. I admit it. They're not nice. If you're not Amish, they call you English. Even if you're black, you're white, you're Hispanic, whatever, you're English. And they're not nice. Like they'll say, what time is it, English? Or they sell pies and quilts and loaves of bread. And you're like, how much is your pie? $8. Well, it's $5 at the grocery store. And then they say, $9.
We would see them. They would come out, when they have that year where they just go out and party.
Rumspringa.
Yeah, thank you.
They all go nuts for a year.
Yeah. And I've heard that they tend to go back to the Amish community.
Always.
Why do you think that is?
The community is so strong. First of all, Rumspringa is a very big deal. When an Amish boy or girl turns 18, they're allowed to what they call go out into the world for a year. So they would come like to our high school and enroll senior year of high school. But because they have freedom, they go completely nuts. And they're smoking weed and smoking meth and getting drunk and having sex and all kinds of stuff. But then at the end of the year, you can either stay in the world or go back to the Amish community. If you stay in the world, you can never have any contact with any Amish ever again, including any member of your family. And so they all go back. But then you read in the local paper that they're always getting arrested because they'll have like stashes of weed or meth that they have hidden on the farm that they're selling to other Amish, and then they get caught.
Yeah.
It's a strange problem.
Did you see the series, The Amish Mafia?
I did.
And it was quite addictive. I think I watched the first 2 seasons. They've got a very strong network across Ohio, Pennsylvania.
They do.
And I did not realize that there's such a rivalry, between the two groups.
It's not homogeneous at all. Not at all.
Nothing ever is.
No.
You mentioned a little bit about having a lot of cousins. What was your childhood like? Were you guys always getting together?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate. I had a great childhood. My dad's parents and my mom's parents all came from the island of Rhodes. My dad's parents in 1931, my mom's in 1934. And even though they all came from the same island, they were very, very different. They were working class people. My dad's father was a meat cutter and then went to work for 30 plus years in a steel mill. My dad's mother, was a stay-at-home mom and housewife. And my mom's parents both worked in the steel mill. But my mom had 8 brothers and sisters. And my dad only had 1 sister, and she never had children. So I didn't have any first cousins on my dad's side. But on my mom's side, 27 first cousins. And at my grandparents' house, my mother's parents' house, that was the meeting site, right? So everybody, we would go to my mom's parents every Sunday and my dad's parents every Thursday, or they would come to our house. So I was close with all my grandparents, but my mom's parents were serious partiers, always with Greek music blasting and tables covered with food and 20, 30 people there at any given time. It was fun. It was a good way to grow up.
That's great.
Surrounded by music and family and food and drinking, unfortunately. Yeah.
Family is so tight. There's so much pride in having
true.
that heritage. And, for what it's worth, it's a very unique and special heritage to have as well.
I went to Greece a couple of weeks ago, and family members just rushed to the airport, and their dinners planned, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and you're kind of a national hero in Greece, right?
Thanks. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. People stop me on the street there all the time.
Wow.
I was only there 2 weeks. I was stopped in the street 5 times, and then the pilot of the plane came out to.
Yeah, they probably saw the roster and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's great. He's here."
Crazy.
Let's talk a little bit about, you're getting into the CIA. This is really like, where your career launched.
Yeah.
And of course, it gave you so much global perspective when you went abroad. Can you talk about the experience that you gained?
I was recruited into the CIA by my graduate school advisor, who was actually undercover as a professor. He was what they used to call a spotter, trying to spot talent for the CIA. He thought that I would be a good fit. I ended up going to work for the division at the CIA that he created, called the Political Psychology Division. By the time I got there, it was the Office of Leadership Analysis. And I was assigned to be the leadership analyst for Iraq. This is in the first week of January of 1990. I wasn't excited about the prospect because nothing ever happened there, ever. It was the same cabinet since the 1968 revolution, right? Nothing ever happened. And my boss told me at the time, work hard, learn the tradecraft, and then after a year or so, you can transfer onto something more interesting like Romania. That's what he told me. So just as I felt like I knew what I was doing, and I had a degree in Middle Eastern studies, and I had followed the Middle East for years already. Just as I felt like I knew what I was doing, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And we predicted a little more than a month that Iraq was going to invade Kuwait, but we thought that they would take just a sliver of northern Kuwait, which made up what is called the Rumaila oil field. There's a long, narrow oil field in southern Iraq, and just barely, like 1 or 2 kilometers of it, crosses the border into Kuwait. And the Kuwaitis were slant drilling, and they were stealing the oil from Iraq, and the Iraqis caught them. And so the Iraqis threatened military action. So at one point in June of 1990, the Pentagon asked the defense attaché in Baghdad, do us a favor, drive down to the border and just tell us what you see down there. And I remember he reported back, the entire Iraqi military is driving south. Wow. Okay. You're not going to send the entire military to take a 2-kilometer sliver of Kuwaiti, uninhabited desert. So we said, he's going to invade the country. We didn't think he'd take the whole country. We thought he would punish the Kuwaitis, maybe bomb Kuwait City, and then move back. But they took the whole country.
August the 2nd, Iraqi troops crossed the border into Kuwait.
Within 2 days of Saddam Hussein ordering his army to storm Kuwait, Iraq had control of the country and would occupy it for the next 7 months. The motivation to invade was mostly financial, with Baghdad wanting command of Kuwait's oil reserves.
So the morning of the invasion, it was August the 2nd, 1990. I remember it like it was yesterday. I got into the office early. I was 25 years old. And as soon as I arrived, my boss said, don't take off your jacket. We're going to the White House. I had never been to the White House before, other than as a tourist, like everybody does.
Right.
So we get in a car, we go to the White House, and we're escorted into the Oval Office. And it's the president, the vice president, the national security advisor, the CIA director, my boss, and me. Again, I was 25 years old. So I sat. Everybody sits down. The president and the vice president are in these 2 wingback chairs. The CIA director and the national security advisor are on 2 chairs off to the side. My boss and I are on this couch. And the president, it was George H.W. Bush. He says, well, now what do we do? And everybody turns and looks at me. It took me a second. But I kicked into my briefing that I had prepared in my head on the way over. And then we went from there. Margaret Thatcher called. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the UK. She called the president that afternoon and famously said, now's not the time to go wobbly, George. And so he made up his mind we were going to push them out by force.
So do you think that there was a little bit of reluctance there before Margaret had made that call?
Oh, yes.
And kind of put him on his masculinity on the spot as well.
I think that's exactly what happened. And in part, it was because I remember as part of my briefing, the Iraqis that morning had named a guy named Ahmed Khatib as the occupation governor of Kuwait. I had met Ahmed Khatib. He hated the Iraqis as much as anybody did. And he certainly never agreed to be the occupation governor of this fake, this fake administration. Mm-hmm. But Khatib had an interesting history. He and his roommate in medical school, George Habash, founded the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And the president just says, Jesus Christ. And I thought, oh, well, this is going to be bad.
Yeah.
And then Thatcher called and said, now's not the time to go wobbly, George. And what, is George H.W. Bush going to be the person responsible for the PFLP taking over Kuwait on behalf of the Iraqi government?
Can you imagine? So this kind of makes sense as to why also so many Palestinians were removed from Kuwait.
Oh, boy, were they. Just after the liberation, I was invited to a wedding of the defense minister's son. The defense minister is now the emir of Kuwait. And Prince Nawaf, Amir Nawaf. And so the son, it was his wedding. Mm-hmm. We were talking about Palestinians. Because, the Palestinians, especially in the Gulf countries, the Palestinians are the middle class, right? It's the Palestinians that are the teachers, the lawyers, the engineers, the professors, the bankers. They make the economy run. And I remember he said to me, in 12 months, there will be no Palestinians in Kuwait. None. I said, how's your country going to run? Your country can't run. You can't replace all the Palestinians with Filipinos and Bangladeshis. They can't just step into life here and just work like the Palestinians have been doing since the 50s. Well, in the end, they didn't expel all the Palestinians. They sure wanted to. But the U.S., the U.K., France, even the Egyptians pressured them to back off. These are not the Palestinians you should be angry with. You should be angry with Yasser Arafat for throwing his endorsement to Saddam Hussein.
I was in the Gulf at the time, lived through the first Gulf War, and this was...
You were getting scuds back then.
We were getting scuds. In fact, I have some Patriot pieces. I brought some trinkets for us to get through. Actually, can you grab that by any chance? Sure. You'll remember this. Sorry, I should have brought these over a little closer. And those are the Patriot pieces right there.
Ah, right. We found a bunch out in the... I don't know whatever happened to mine. I had it on a bookshelf for years. I hope I didn't lose it. Yeah, look at this. When I was in Riyadh, there were scuds being launched all the time. And there was a British photographer there, who took a picture of the exact moment when a Patriot was hitting a scud in midair.
Well, nothing yet. Journalists are coming up to the roof now. It's foggy out tonight. It's probably about 40 degrees with about a 35-mile-an-hour wind from the north. Air raid sirens are blowing all over the city of Riyadh. And we're looking north toward the airport. Waiting. Birds away, birds away. First one's up. There he is. Right up there. Right up there. Got him. Nailed him. Right above us. Second one. Fire in the hole. Right overhead. Right overhead. There it goes. Impact. Impact. Oh, shit. We got impact.
We used to carry these around. I have not pulled this out in a long time, but look, it still has the Saudi sand all over it.
It has dust all over it.
Yeah, it's dusty. This is like Saudi.
Oh boy, I remember we had one at every desk.
Yeah, and it's like you'd put this thing on. What is it, dragger? But yeah, oh my gosh, look at I honestly, like, it's been so long.
Wow.
Every once in a while I'll pull this stuff out, but yeah, like this is this is what got me interested in war. Like, why are there Scuds targeting the oil and all
I
of
went
that?
into Kuwait City with the Marines on Liberation Day, February of 1991, and we ate MREs for 3 months that I was there. I mean, there was just no food. The Iraqis had killed everything. They'd burned everything. Every once in a while, a dhow would come in from Iran with fruits and vegetables. But otherwise, it was all MREs. And funny thing about the MREs, they were all dated from the Vietnam War in the 1960s.
Really?
Yeah, they keep
American MREs.
They keep forever.
Oh, that's amazing.
Gross.
I liked them. I liked
I did too,
MREs.
actually.
Whenever they had beef jerky in there, and you couldn't get beef jerky in Saudi, and I was just
No.
like, oh man, I'd love to talk to you about your experience of being in Saudi Arabia.
I hated every
I'm
minute
kind
of
of jumping around a little bit. You hated every minute. What were the things that you disliked or found to be
sure.
challenging?
Well, I shouldn't say I hated every minute of it. I was very excited to go to Saudi Arabia. And I went there. I was stationed briefly in Taif with the Kuwaiti royal family. And then I went to Riyadh. And I was excited. It was my first time in Saudi Arabia. And so I was proud of my rudimentary Arabic at the time. And I remember walking to the embassy one morning, and there was a Saudi guard there at the back entrance, and I said, "Salamu alaikum." And he just kind of looked at me and didn't respond. And I thought, that's rude, but all right. And the next day, I did it again, "Salamu alaikum." He looks at me again. Third day, "Salamu alaikum." And finally I said, "What's your problem?" And he said, "You Americans are hired help. We brought you here to protect us, and we pay you for it. We're not friends."
Wow.
And that set the tone for my experience in Saudi Arabia. We are not friends. We buy their oil, they buy our weapons, and we just have to get along.
Can you talk to me a little more about that strategic relationship?
Yeah, this goes back to Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia, and President Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt was the one who coined the term special relationship. It's not a special relationship. Ibn Saud, Saudi Arabia wasn't a country until the 1930s. It was nomadic. There were nomadic areas, the Nejd, the Hijaz, a couple of other, the empty quarter. And the Al Saud wasn't even the most influential or powerful family. It was the Rashid family. I met a couple of Rashids, and they were like, "You don't like it here? Try being us. We lost. This used to be our country." Right? Now it's Saudi Arabia because it was Abdulaziz bin Abdurrahman al Saud that took power. But anyway, they discovered oil. And we, developed a dependence on oil with the invention of the engine. And so we would buy it. And they got richer and richer and richer. Another thing that I learned there too, I used the word fundamentalist one time. And one Saudi that I was friendly with said, "You really shouldn't use that word here." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because we're all fundamentalists. We don't see that as a bad thing." And he was right. They're all Wahhabis. They're all fundamentalist Muslims there. It's a different kind of Islam than it is anywhere else in the Gulf, North Africa. Certainly the Syrians, the Lebanese, even the Jordanians are more liberal. Not like the Saudis. Now, it's changed. I was in Saudi, 2 years ago. And it was dramatically different. I saw women unveiled. I saw women driving cars, which was nuts to me. There's actually a movie theater that is open in Jeddah. When I was living there in Riyadh, especially, Riyadh's more conservative than Jeddah is, they would have the call to prayer 5 times a day, and literally the entire country would shut down. You're in a restaurant, there's a call to prayer, everybody gets up, walks out, they shut the steel, shutters. Yeah. You wait until the call to prayer is over. They reopen the restaurant. You go back in and finish your, by then cold meal. And now it's like, nobody even really pays any attention. I was shocked by it.
Yeah. Definitely Mohammed bin Salman is pushing these reforms. Do you think that, this is interesting to me because definitely you were in Riyadh and it was much more conservative, much more conservative than the Eastern Province where I was. Nonetheless, we still had those experiences.
The Saudis only got television in 1972. They had refused to allow television in the kingdom because they thought it would be a corrupting influence, until finally some member of the ulama, the Council of Religious Scholars said, if we had this television, we could just read the Quran 24 hours a day. And they were like, oh my God, that's a great idea. So they had an English language channel and an Arabic language channel. That's a little bit more liberal now. But back then, you would turn it on, and like the English language one, I still remember one that, this is like so emblematic of Saudi Arabia in 1990. They have the call to prayer, and then they do the reading. And they have this really heavy reverb. I don't know why. You may not have sex with your mother.
Right.
You may not have sex with your father. And then they go through all the different family members you can't have sex with. It's like,
but
wow.
What did they leave out? The cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're all married.
Right.
You've, I'm sure, seen the King Faisal Eye and Ear Hospital in Riyadh, which is one of the foremost ENT hospitals in the world. Why? Why is it there? Because they're all intermarried and they all have these crazy eye diseases that don't appear anywhere else in the world.
I've heard they're investing heavily on the genetic research side of things to try to solve those. Also, they want to solve the issue of diabetes.
Well, diabetes is an important thing to raise. Diabetes is rampant in the kingdom because everybody's fat, right? I remember when I was living in Bahrain, I was there from 94 to 96, and we would drive over the causeway to Dhahran or Al Khobar. There was a mall in Al Khobar, so we would go to the mall and have dinner and walk around and drive back to Bahrain. But they were installing new escalators at Dhahran Airport, and they were double wide because Saudis are so fat that they couldn't fit on a normal-sized escalator.
My goodness, yeah. I remember when fast food became available. And, it's so interesting because over here in the States, like, you don't really want to have to hit up a drive-through. But over there, it's like prime real estate. It's on the Corniche.
Yes.
Like, it's like the golden arch, of McDonald's and all of that. A lot of this came after the Gulf War.
Yes.
You reminded me, Al Shola Mall, actually, it burned down. It caught fire, and then, this is the type of stuff that happens. They put out the fire, but then some people thought it would be a good idea to get a bunch of fans in there to get the smoke out.
Oh my
God!
And set the fire again.
Exactly.
Oh no! I went to a Hardee's one time in Riyadh, and I'm standing there looking at the menu board, and I said, I guess I'll have a chicken breast. And the guy goes, sir, no, chicken ribs. And I said, are you kidding me? I can't even say the word breast in this country. Please, sir, please.
The censorship was something. It's so different now. Like when I tell the stories, you're talking about the 80s and 90s, but censorship was just insane. They would have to cut out certain words and phrases, and movies would have to have clips cut out, no kissing, obviously, no intimacy, anything of that sort. Channel 3 TV kind of thing. And it's like, we'd have Donahue, and it was like kids programming, Donahue, how to wear a gas mask.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, things like that. It was like, it would be like a 30-minute HSE video, health, safety, environment video over like how to stay alive, essentially, in case of a chemical or biological attack coming in from Saddam. Those were crazy days. One thing that we had in Saudi that you might recall, because there was a ban on alcohol.
Yes.
There's still a ban on alcohol.
Yeah.
But
what a joke that is.
Back in the day when exploring for oil, and it was like Standard Oil and all of this, they would hand out this called the Blue Flame, And it was essentially how to make moonshine.
Wow.
And it gives you the full, like, here's the alcohol content, here's the amount of sugar to use, and you would get this upon arrival. And
there's kind of a famous story at the American Embassy where the logistics officer had gotten a call from the airport saying to please send some people to the airport right away because your shipment of office furniture is leaking. We had this thing at the embassy called the tea room. You had to go through we had a video store, a rental. It was all for free. You could just take whatever video you wanted. And they were unedited videos that we had shipped out in the diplomatic pouch. And then you go through the video room to the tea room, and it was the liquor store for the embassy. And so you could buy literally any liquor that you wanted. You could take it home, but you couldn't give it away as a gift.
Yeah. Well, now I think they just opened up the first alcohol store that you can buy it, but it's in the DQ, in the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh.
And you have to be a diplomat to get in.
Exactly.
In Bahrain, they had 2 liquor stores, but you couldn't buy if you were Bahraini. And in Doha, I went to Qatar the first time in 1990. The tallest building in the country was the Marriott Hotel. It was the only building higher than 2 floors. And most everything was made out of mud. It bears no resemblance at all to what the country looks like today. But they had what they called the library at the Marriott. And you had to show your passport or your igama, your identification card. No Muslims were permitted in the library. There were no books in the library either. It was a bar.
Yeah.
On the 3rd floor of the Marriott.
Yeah, but those stories bond you with the people that have lived through them and experienced them as well. So a friend of mine created the Blue Flame. Remember, it was called Sid, short for Siddiqui, the moonshine. And so I was like, listen, I'm going to have a friend over on the podcast that's going to talk about Saudi Arabia and we're going to reminisce. I need you to send this to me. And he did, which is awesome. All right, let's do this. There we go. Let's see. I have not tried this yet, but supposedly we're going to taste test right now, and I'm going to see if it is indeed the real Sid.
We'll see if we go blind.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I'm very excited to see this. Oh, wow.
Oh, my goodness.
Legit. Okay.
Look at that.
Siddiqui Classic
I haven't
Smooth
seen
Rum.
that.
80 proof, 40% alcohol. So it won't light us on fire.
Right.
Like the real Saudi
right.
Sid would
it was dangerous.
back in the day. But I just noticed he did the Blue Flame on top of there. That's cool.
Did.
Okay, so the recommendation, let's get some, let me pour you some over here. It wouldn't be Saudi if we didn't use these red cups.
Seriously.
I used to drink it with Diet Pepsi or Pepsi. But he suggests having it with cranberry and a splash of lime.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Let's have a little bit. I just want to taste it. I'm just going to taste it. How would you like it with...
May I have it with cranberry?
Cranberry. You got it. And hold on. Ooh. Oh, yeah. Oh, also, I didn't know. Because I was I remember it being white. Gosh. And apparently if you put oak in with it, and let it sit.
It takes the color of the oak.
Exactly. I didn't know that. I've never had dark Sid.
Now that you mention it, the Sid that I had was clear.
Yeah. It's so Saudi to be clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I have no idea how much to put in here. Oh, I don't remember any of this. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll split it. Okay. Well.
What's it say on the product of where?
Here, I'll hand this to you. You can check it out. It's a product of the USA,
of
but
the
I
USA.
think there's a very famous, he told me there's a very famous distillery where he gets it made in Wales.
Really?
Or Scotland. I think he said Wales, but somewhere in the UK.
Siddiqui goes back to 1952. It's the code word for moonshine after alcohol was outlawed in the Middle East. My father was an engineer and one of these famous desert moonshiners. This still beside me is one of the original stills from 1960. This one belonged to Marlon Townsend. He was the captain of the USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier, founder of Top Gun Naval Flight Academy, and commander of the Asian Air Fleet. He was also a famous desert moonshiner working in the Middle East.
And I was like, listen, I got to get this because I'm going to have you on the podcast. And like, there are very few people that can enjoy some Sid with me.
Seriously.
And really know what I'm talking about, like what this is.
And it's a beautiful bottle on top of it.
Yeah. I'll let
It has
you
these
pour your
paisley etchings all over it, and it's got oil field workers and...
That's interesting. Yeah, there's like an oil derrick right there.
Yeah. I like it.
That's cool. Bipsy. Do you
Bipsy.
remember Pepsi?
Yeah, sure do. Bipsy.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To you.
Oh my God, it's delicious.
Isn't it?
It's delicious.
I haven't had this in 20 years, probably.
It's been 35 years for me.
Wow.
It's delicious.
I didn't realize that it's like a rum, right?
Yeah,
I always thought it
right.
was more of
Grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, cool. I just want to
Wow.
say a huge thank you
Thank
to
you.
Nigel for sending it out. By the way, I also remember driving in Saudi Arabia.
In the desert.
Half Moon Bay Road.
Yeah, sure.
And I remember just being so nervous, but
Wow, if
There
you
was-
got caught, boy, that would have
been
there was
real
hell
bad.
to pay.
there would have
There
been
weren't
bad.
mutawayin over there.
Yes. I'm so glad they don't have power anymore.
Yeah,
To,
me too.
to like, the
I didn't
arrest
believe it
power.
until I saw it.
You can
Didn't
always
have
tell because
power.
they have the short.
The short thobes, and the canes, the bamboo canes.
Yeah.
One whacked my my wife. We were shopping, and she had a scarf on, but her face wasn't covered, and he gave her a good whack. I went after him.
Oh man.
Uh-huh.
What did you do?
I grabbed him. 3 other mutawayin ran over, and I said, in Arabic, I said, "We're diplomats, and she does not have to cover her face." And I shoved the guy back, and then they walked away. Oh, she cried. It was awful.
You're a good protector because I also remember a story of you in Greece.
Still trying to live that down.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start journeying along. You mentioned a little about the Gulf War. What was the feeling like, with the Scuds when you were seeing this was like kinetic war? It was the first time you probably experienced something like that, like
couldn't
seeing
believe
missiles.
my eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, like what were some of the thoughts and the conversations that were happening around? We were so concerned of the CBR, chemical biological threat. What was concerning to you? Did you evacuate your family? Were they with you or not? Or
I didn't have children yet at the time, and my wife was in the U.S., so I was there by myself. And there was great worry at the CIA. We didn't believe Saddam Hussein had a nuclear program, and it turned out that he didn't. But we were very concerned about chemical weapons and biological weapons. Yeah. Biological weapons can be crafted, in somebody's kitchen. You just need, a little space with an electrical outlet. You can make BW. CW, we were confident that he had it. The question was he going to use it? And I remember getting what are called critic cables. There are levels of immediacy. There's routine, priority, immediate, NIACT, which means night action, means wake somebody up and have them address this. Then there's flash, which is an emergency, and then there's critic. That means they're coming over the walls. So we would get these critic cables from NSA just saying, NSA has detected a missile launch from such and such coordinates. So we knew that if the coordinates were in Western Iraq, it was going to Israel. If they were in Southern Iraq, it was going to Saudi Arabia. And we would just wait. And then 5 minutes later, here comes the missile.
The job of hitting the bullet fell to the Patriot missile. Originally designed to attack slower-moving jet aircraft, the Patriots were hurriedly modified to intercept enemy missiles. But Scuds broke apart as they headed toward the ground, and more often than not, the Patriot hit pieces of the missile but left the warhead to free fall and explode.
So we had about 5 minutes to get the Patriots ready and then to shoot them out of the sky. The thing is, if they were carrying BW or CW, shooting them out of the sky isn't going to do anything. It's just going to disperse the agents.
Yeah.
I had my mask on. They called all clear. It wasn't a chemical. It was just high explosive. As you can see, it's total. The whole thing's gone.
Yeah. And, Saddam, for all of his miscalculations, he at least didn't miscalculate that by arming the missiles with biological or chemical weapons.
And everyone thought that he would. What do you think held him back?
Honestly, I think it was that he understood the power of the Allied militaries, and he had lost the support of the Soviet Union.
Do you think that, he really thought that there wouldn't be an issue with him invading Iraq at first?
Well, that's an important point. So, the American ambassador to Iraq at the time was April Glaspie. She was an absolutely wonderful ambassador, a wonderful diplomat, career diplomat. And in very, very late July 1990, she was preparing to leave Baghdad for 6 weeks to go on vacation. And her elderly mother lived with her in Baghdad. April was her caregiver. And so here we are on the brink of war, and the ambassador's ready to go on vacation. Secretary of State James Baker cabled her and said, go see Saddam and tell him that we will not take a position on Arab border disputes. That's very important because April, for many years, was blamed for the invasion. Oh, no. It was not her fault. She did exactly as Jim Baker instructed her to do. And it was because nobody thought he would take the entire country. They thought he would just take that little strip along the border for Rumaila. So she went to see Saddam, and it was the only time she had seen Saddam other than when she presented her credentials to him when she first arrived as ambassador. Her career never recovered. She ended up having a couple of jobs at Maine State in Washington, and then she retired quietly. So she went and saw Saddam and said, just as she was instructed, the United States does not take a position on Arab border disputes. And we were all, it was a dozen of us gathered in the CIA Operations Center waiting for her to send the cable back in. It came in as what's called a no-dis. That means no dissemination. So it's just from the ambassador to the Secretary of State. But then the CIA gets a copy in the Operations Center, the White House gets a copy at the National Security Council, the Office of the Secretary of Defense gets a copy, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff get a copy. So we're all waiting. And no-dis cables are so sensitive that you're not allowed to make copies of them. You can read them and take notes, but you can't copy it. So the no-dis came in. She said, I just came out of my meeting with Saddam Hussein. This is what I said. This is what his response was. And everybody was like, oh, okay. Crisis averted. And then the next day, April and her mom went on vacation. They came back to the United States, and Saddam invades Kuwait. And in the very beginning...
he probably was like, oh, carte blanche.
Oh, yeah. He kept using the term green light. The Americans gave me the green light. And we're like, wait, no, we didn't. We said, and it was because of a fundamental misunderstanding. We said this a lot at the beginning. Saddam did not understand the position that he was putting the United States in. That Kuwait was one of our primary oil suppliers. And you can't just, and it wasn't just that he invaded the country. He invaded the country and just started massacring everybody. You can't do that. And then you've got Thatcher.
He really was a tyrant, though.
He was a tyrant. He was a monster. Yes. His sons were worse. But, even in the analysis, I told you I was in the Office of Leadership Analysis at the time, so I was Saddam's intelligence community biographer. Whenever I would brief a high-level foreign person, the head of an intelligence service, a president, a prime minister, once a king, we would always equate him to a mob boss, right? He ran the country like a mafia family would run its family. He'd kill a lot of people, but it was nothing personal against them. It was just business. His sons were psychopaths. His son Uday, the elder of the two sons, he also had 3 daughters and an illegitimate youngest son. But Uday would rape women, and then when he was done with them, he would throw them off the roof of the hotel.
I was in Iraq, and I was in one of them, Uday and Qusay, fucking raped people. Them guys were evil.
You went to their palace, that kind of shit.
All of them. Them fucking guys, them palaces, they would pick up fucking 12-year-olds off the street. They didn't give
feed them to dogs.
Fuck. The lions, we found them fucking. So Uday had lions. Lions were on the army side, the big army side, and they were inside this fence, right? And then the lions were just lazy as fuck, didn't care about no army guys. And then one day I seen a lady and kids walk by, and they're just behind chain link, and them fucking lions went nuts. And I knew
They'd
only
been feeding them
that
ladies and kids.
Fuck yeah, they were fucking evil,
I
man.
read so many horrible stories about those guys that they would find a woman who was getting married, and they would rape her and then feed her to their dogs.
Yeah.
I bring your sisters here. This evil guy, he's a lunatic.
Ugh.
Why would you do something like that? And he got
Just
pleasure
power.
out of that.
Power.
The second son, Qusay, was the head of the what was called the Special Security Organization. So there were several rings of security around Saddam. SSO was the innermost ring, headed by Saddam's son. Then there was the Special Republican Guard, then the Republican Guard, and then the military. And he didn't trust anybody in the military. Yeah.
Wow.
It was bad.
Have you ever seen that series that came out on Amazon? It was called Tyrant. Actually.
Yes.
That was such a good show because it reminded me, it was like a little bit of Gaddafi, a little bit of Saddam, but the boys, they really show, one of those reminded me of Uday so much, where I was just like, oh, that's just straight out of his playbook, you know, the abuse of exert power onto women. It's that woman, I want her. Horrible.
He even raped Tariq Aziz's daughter. Tariq Aziz was the only Christian in government. He was a long time foreign minister and deputy prime minister, and he was Catholic, Chaldean Catholic, and Uday raped his daughter, and then said, "What are you going to do about it?" And the answer was nothing.
Nothing.
What could he do about
Tariq, he was still part of the leadership, the Ba'ath leadership, because I
That's
remember his face on one of the playing cards.
Oh yeah. It was up toward the top.
Yeah.
It was Saddam, his brother Ali
brother.
Hassan al-Majid.
That's right. Yeah.
His half-brother Barzan Takridi, Watban Takridi, Sabawi Takridi, Izzat Ibrahim Adouri, the vice president, who ended up being the only one to just die a natural death of old age because he hid out all those years. Tariq Aziz, a handful of military guys. We wrecked the place. And, like Saddam Hussein, or love him, or hate him, rather, the fact of the matter is that he was the only Sunni bulwark against Iran. And he was the only thing keeping the Iranians from just having their way in the Gulf. And now he's gone. And now Iraq, for all intents and purposes, it's almost an Iranian client state.
Correct. Yeah. And do you think that Saudi Arabia is a good counterbalance, though?
Mm-mm.
Or
No.
American based? So there's no counterbalance to Iran right now?
Not
in your
really.
view?
There's an old saying, there is no such thing as permanent relationships, only permanent interests. The United States has an interest in keeping Iran at bay, but Saudi Arabia has an interest in neighborly relations. And so we can't bank on the notion that Saudi Arabia is always going to be on the verge of a state of war with Iran, especially with Mohammed bin Salman. He's far more pragmatic than the earlier generation of Saudi leaders. It cost them a lot of money to constantly prepare for war with Iran. And the Iranians would kick their butts in a couple of weeks. probably even with American assistance. At the same time, we're at, what's it called? Rashid, I think, in south of Doha in Qatar. And we're all over Saudi Arabia. We don't really want to be there. I say in my first book, The Reluctant Spy, that when I got back from Pakistan in the middle of 2002, I got promoted on the strength of the Abu Zubaydah capture. And I was named the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. So my first day on that job, I went in and I said, "So, what are we doing?" And he said, the deputy director said, "Actually, I can't tell you what we're doing yet. You need to go up to the 6th floor and sign some secrecy agreements." So I went up to the 6th floor. The security officer had laid out these 6 separate secrecy agreements. A secrecy agreement says that you can never talk about these things. You take them to your grave unless they're declassified. These have been declassified. So I signed 6 of them. He had them all laid out. And when I finished the 6, I said, "Okay," I said, "so what's up?" And the guy took a breath and he said, "Well, early next year, we're going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And we're going to open the world's largest Air Force base. And we're going to move all of our air assets out of Saudi Arabia into Iraq so that we can deprive Osama bin Laden of the ability of saying that we are polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques." And I was dumbfounded. And I said, "But we haven't captured bin Laden yet." And he said, "The decision's been made and the battle lines are drawn." He said, "The pro-invasion faction is OVP, Office of the Vice President, OSD, Office of the Secretary of Defense, and NSC. And the anti-invasion faction is the State Department, the CIA, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And he said, "But the decision's been made." So I went back to the office, and the deputy director said, "You sign everything?" And I said, "Are they out of their minds?" And he said, "Yes, but the decision's been made." And so 6 months later, we invaded Iraq.
John, when these things are happening, so like, you know that there is a larger mission at hand. What's going through your mind? It's a top-down decision.
It's a top-down decision. And the CIA, this is something most Americans don't understand. The CIA is not a policy organization. It's a policy support organization. So the CIA doesn't make these decisions. The decisions have to come from the White House. And so when the decision is made, you do as you're told.
How much influence do you think Cheney had on Bush?
100% of the decision-making on these issues came from Cheney.
Wow.
Yeah, this was all Dick Cheney, all of it.
And at the time, they were close with Chalabi. Who, on the external side, people can be easily fooled. I can see how, a lot of...
Chalabi was a used car salesman.
Yeah, he was like very well spoken.
Boy, was he. $2,000 suits.
Right. So can you talk a little about that? I mean, how extensive is a vetting process when it comes to discussing like leadership transition?
Well, that's an important issue. So just as background, Ahmed Chalabi was very unusual in that he was a Shia Muslim Kurd. There are like a handful of them, right? Almost all Kurds are Sunni Muslim. So his parents took him out of Iraq in 1965 and they moved to Jordan. And his parents stressed education, so he was educated in the UK, got degrees in finance, went back to Jordan and started a bank called Petrobank. And this became the go-to bank for Iraqi immigrants in Jordan, right? People put their life savings in Petrobank. And Petrobank was functioning for years until the late 1980s. And in the late 1980s, Ahmed Chalabi stole all $36 million that was in Petrobank, transferred it to accounts in Switzerland and London, and literally escaped the country in the trunk of his secretary's car. She drove him across the border into Syria, and then he flew from Damascus to London. He went on trial in Jordan in absentia and was sentenced to death, right? He bankrupted literally every Iraqi in Jordan. So, sentenced in absentia to death. He's living the high life in London on the money that he stole. Bought a townhouse in Mayfair, central London, right by Harrods.
Oh, my.
Oh, yeah, living large. And so Iraq invades Kuwait. The State Department says to the CIA, we need to create some sort of an opposition, a unified opposition group. The CIA says, okay, we're going to create this group called the Iraqi National Congress, the INC. We're going to get all the various Iraqi opposition groups together. They'll all be under the INC umbrella. This was done at a conference in Vienna, Austria, in the fall of 1990. And frankly, the reason why the CIA thought that Chalabi was attractive at the time is because he was very Western in his orientation, and his English was as good as ours. That was really the bottom line. And then the Jordanians came to us and said, whoa, wait a minute. This guy's got a death sentence over his head in Jordan. And this is what he did. He's a friggin' criminal. So we said to the Jordanians, well, exigent circumstances, maybe the king could pardon him. That would make it easier for everybody. And the king pardons him. The CIA starts to transfer money to the Iraqi National Congress, and it goes directly into Chalabi's pockets. And he stole millions of dollars of the CIA's money and transferred them into secret accounts in Switzerland. So the CIA in 1991 issued something called a burn notice, where a cable is sent to every CIA officer in the world saying, there's this guy, Ahmed Chalabi, he's a criminal, he stole from us, and no CIA employee is permitted to have any contact with him. He's burned, he's dead to us, right? So then, 11 years later, Dick Cheney says, we're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. We're going to need to install somebody as the president of Iraq. I like this guy, Ahmed Chalabi. And the CIA said, well, wait a minute now. We dealt with Chalabi a decade ago. He's a thief. He's a criminal. He's a liar. We can't trust him. The Jordanians want to kill him. He's a Shia. And Cheney said, I want you to deal with him anyway. And George Tenet stood up to Cheney and said, no, we have a burn notice on Chalabi. We're not going to talk to him, and we're not going to fund him. And so Cheney said, then I'll fund him. So they created an internal intelligence organization within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, headed by an Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, a position that never existed before. And all of a sudden, at the CIA, we start getting these very specific intelligence reports. Iraqi chemical weapons can be found at this location. Okay, then we send the United Nations inspection team to the location. There's nothing there. Okay, well, there are chemical weapons at this other location. And then we send the team there. And there are no chemical weapons. Turns out Chalabi was just making this stuff up, passing it to the Pentagon, taking the Pentagon's millions of dollars, pocketing that, and then there were no weapons of mass destruction. So in the end, it turned out that the INC had been heavily infiltrated by Saddam's intelligence services. And Chalabi never achieved any kind of... He was like Minister of Transportation or some silly thing like that in the very beginning after Saddam was overthrown, but he never amounted to anything. And then he ended up dying of a heart attack shortly after. But this was all on Dick Cheney. Cheney forced him on us.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy to think the amount of power that he was able to maneuver and steer in those days.
Oh, yes.
I'd love, and thanks so much for, giving that type of insight. I'd love to kind of go back to something that you talked about with regards to the inability for radicals in Saudi Arabia to start using the excuse of there being Western presence in the land of the two holy mosques to exploit the sentiment of, what would later become terrorism that impacted us. I can kind of see the perspective of the U.S. government at the time, given that the Khobar Tower bombings had occurred a few years prior. You had been sent out to Saudi Arabia after Khobar Tower. Can you talk about that, what your findings were, and then would you possibly agree with the statement that was made based on what you saw from the Khobar Tower attack?
I would agree. So Khobar Towers was destroyed in a massive truck bomb attack on June 25th, 1996. I remember that date because it was my wedding anniversary. And my wife had just given birth to our second son, so she was in the States. I was in Bahrain, and I was laying in bed. We were on the phone. I had called her to say happy anniversary, see how the baby was doing. And that bomb went off. Mind you, it was 16 miles away from me. And it shattered all the windows in the front of my house. I instinctively rolled out of bed to protect myself. And she said, "My God, what was that?" And I said, "It was a bomb. And it feels like it was in front of the house." So I waited, and there was no follow-up bomb. Finally, I went outside. All my neighbors, I lived in a small walled compound of 10 houses. There was like a Swedish diplomatic family, a couple of American businessmen, a couple of Gulf Air pilots and their families. So we were all outside, and we were like, what the heck was that? It was massive, whatever it was. And we're looking for damage. Like there's got to be a crater or something. And there was nothing. I went back to bed. The next morning, I get into the embassy, and we had a TV in the lobby of the embassy that had CNN on, and they're showing Khobar Towers, and it was destroyed.
It's the date their loved ones serving us in uniform were murdered. 19 U.S. Air Force personnel died in that terrorist attack.
And then the ambassador runs up to me and he says, "Do you have a Saudi visa?" And I said, "Yes." It turns out only 2 of us had Saudi visas, because I used to take women, co-workers. Women weren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, and they'd say, "Oh, I'd love to go to the mall, love to go shopping." And I'd say, "I have a visa, I'll take you over to Saudi Arabia." We would drive over for an afternoon or an evening, have dinner, and then come back. So I had a Saudi visa, and he said, "Can you get to the consulate in Tehran like immediately?" And I said, "Sure." So a colleague of mine and I got in the car, drove over to Saudi Arabia. I had never seen devastation like that before. The entire front half of the building was just sheared off. Like Oklahoma City. It looked just like Oklahoma City. But one of the things that still sticks in my memory was when you looked up at the building, there was blood on the ceiling of all of the rooms because guys were asleep. This was an apartment building housing American military people.
Yeah, Air Force.
Air Force. They were blown up out of their beds and just smashed against the ceiling. And the blood just like gushed out of them.
Horrible.
The crater from the truck bomb was so deep, it was 30 feet deep, that water was seeping in from the Persian Gulf.
Here's the hole.
We blamed, fundamentalists. In the end, and this is kind of an inconvenient truth, the Iranians did it. We blamed the predecessor of Al-Qaeda, which was kind of like not yet named, but we knew that there was this radical Saudi group. They had done something called the OPM Sang bombing in Riyadh, where we used to go grocery shopping at OPM Sang. They killed something like 5 people there. The only reason that the death toll wasn't higher in Al Khobar is because one of the lookouts, the Air Force guys on the roof, saw the truck pull up, and two guys got out of the truck and just ran for their lives. And he started screaming for everybody to evacuate.
From the story that we've gathered, and it's pretty much factual, he apparently tried to come through the checkpoint. We wouldn't let him through, and it was suspicious, so he was talking to the people on the roofs, and they were watching him. One of the watchmen on the roofs were here somewhere, seen him, and he parked his truck, and he took off running, and the cop seen this, and the first thing he did, he called it in, and then he started in, and he was yelling to evacuate the building. And he had, I guess, about 3 or 4 minutes, and then detonation took place.
He saved countless lives by doing that. But still, it was a significant loss of life. And it was that event that got people in Washington to thinking, we should probably try to move out of Saudi Arabia. You know, the king of Saudi Arabia, historically, his title isn't just king, right? It's king and custodian of the two holy mosques. And they take that very, very seriously. The two holy mosques being, of course, in Mecca and Medina. They take it very seriously. And during the first Gulf War, anti-American fundamentalists were very successful in spreading propaganda that American female soldiers were driving, that they were having sex in public, that they were walking around the American bases naked, that they had sex in Mecca in front of the Holy Kaaba, none of which was true, of course. But people believed that silliness. Mm-hmm. And so the thought was, we should just get the hell out of there. And the idea was, well, where are we going to go? Can't all go to Qatar. Can't all go to Kuwait. Right? We had the Navy in Bahrain. We had the Air Force in Qatar. We had elements of the Army in Kuwait. But we had gigantic military presence in Saudi Arabia. Well, the only place big enough to hold all those people was Iraq. So that was the plan.
Think of like the geostrategy in that situation.
Yeah. There's a joke. Like, why would Iran put their country right in the middle of all of our military bases?
That's a good question. It remains unanswered. You mentioned living in Bahrain.
Two of the happiest years of my life.
Yeah, I was going to say, I lived there for a year or so, and like, it's just so different.
It's wonderful.
You know, they're such a free people.
Yeah.
For the most part, like a lot of them don't even wear a headdress or anything. It's very open in terms of the society, probably because like so many of the families were merchant families.
Yes.
But what was your experience
Exactly
like?
Right. Bahrain is truly unique in the Middle East. The royal family is Sunni. Most of the population, when I was there, was Shia, which was the cause of friction. The royal family has given blanket citizenship to Syrians, Palestinians, Indian Muslims, Pakistanis to dilute the Shia population. And now it's about 50-50. But Bahrain was determined not to be Saudi Arabia, right? They have an enormous expatriate community, mostly British. Great restaurants, bars, nightclubs, 5-star, first-class hotels, beautiful, clean beaches. But you've raised a very important point. The moneyed families in Bahrain are not from oil. Bahrain has no oil, right? They were producing 50,000 barrels a day when I was living there, and they were consuming 50,000 barrels a day. Their money came from trade, and trade is what opened them up to the rest of the world. So where the Saudis were so insular that they never met anybody from outside the Nejd and the Hijaz, the Bahrainis were trading with, the Indians and the Iranians and the Zanzibaris and the Omanis, and they were going all over the known part of the world. Mm-hmm. Also, there's a difference in ancient histories. Bahrain has a history going back to something called the Dilmun civilization, which was dated to 1000 BC, and they embrace it. And they have a world-class, first-rate museum there, the National Museum of Bahrain, that interactively explores the Dilmun civilization. Right? There are ancient ruins in Bahrain that are traced to Alexander the Great, for example, on his way to Afghanistan and India. There are ruins from Mesopotamian civilization, the Sumerians, the Hittites in southern Turkey, all stopped in Bahrain, and the Bahrainis embrace it. The Saudis, whenever they would discover some ancient pagan temple, they would bulldoze it. And then when the United Nations finally complained, like, you're destroying these ancient treasures, these world, heritage treasures, they stopped bulldozing them, but they began covering them up with sand. So you can't go find an ancient, pre-Islamic site in Saudi Arabia. Officially, they don't exist. Officially, there is no history before the advent of Islam.
Wow, I didn't realize that. I wonder now with MBS, like, I remember seeing some information about Al-Hala area and the ancient civilization there. Maybe there's a little bit of opening.
Well, I think there is. And just in the last year, for the very first time in Saudi history, they started issuing tourist visas.
I know. I'm so happy. One of the hardest things, honestly, for people that grew up in Saudi Arabia as third culture kids is the inability to go back. It was such a closed society. Even if you had an invitation, it was, what is the medical need?
That's right.
And, for someone that's young, female, single,
you just have
forget
to walk
about
away
it.
from that part of your life.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of people would say that, like, okay, it's a chapter that's closed. It was such a difficult thing. Imagine not being able to go to your childhood home. Ramkhan's really struggled with that.
I mentioned a few minutes ago that I used to go to Saudi Arabia all the time when I was living in Bahrain. My ex-wife enjoyed the exoticism, right? She would get completely covered, except for her face. The first time she went completely veiled, and we took her mother, and they laughed through the whole thing. It was fun. And we would go every, 6 weeks or so, go to the mall, buy some high-end dates, right? Have a nice dinner, go to the souk and buy, gold or antiques or some old coffee pot or whatever. And word got around that I knew Dhahran and Al-Khobar and Dammam and could, put on a nice little tour for a day. So people in the embassy would ask me to take them. Well, near the end of my tour in Bahrain, we had a turnover of personnel, and all the guys that were in the embassy were replaced by women. And one of them said, hey, would you take a group of us to Saudi Arabia so we could go shopping? I said, of course, I'd love to. So we sent our passports over. The Saudis will only give a 30-day visa. They were jerks about it. And then they would ask us for a 10-year visa. It's like, well, why would I give you a 10-year visa when you give me a 30-day visa? But, we buy their oil, they buy our weapons, so we give them the 10-year visas. So we send all of our passports over with a diplomatic note saying, Second Secretary for Economic Affairs, Kiriakou, wants to take this list of accredited diplomats to Saudi Arabia for the day. Denied. And for reason, they put suspected of promoting prostitution.
Oh my gosh! Can you imagine going in with?
So
like
I called the Saudi consular officer, and I said, "You son of a bitch!" I said, "You think I can't do the same thing to you?" He's like, "Oh no, it's not from me. It was from Riyadh. They don't like you." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm taking over consular for the month of June because we had such a small embassy. People would go on vacation, and we had to cover for each other." So I said, I walked into consular that day, the day I took over, and I said, no Saudi citizen will get a visa while I'm in charge. None. Sure enough, the very first guy that comes up to the window is Saudi, and I was rude, and I'm not rude to anybody. What's your purpose for wanting to go to the United States? I said to him, because I was being a jerk. And he's like, my 6-year-old son, he was burned in a kitchen fire. And I need to take him to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center for skin grafts. And I look, and there's this kid, and he is completely disfigured. And I'm like, oh, my God. All right. Okay.
Hold on here. Okay, I'm so glad that the humanity. Okay.
I gave it to him.
Yeah.
Mashallah.
Yeah.
Good luck with your boy. I'm from Pittsburgh, I told him. But I rejected everybody else. And then finally they called back and they're like, all right. Because they were leaving the American embassy having been rejected by me, going to the Saudi embassy, and saying, hey, the Americans rejected me. And I said, Abdurrahman, I told you, two can play that game. Prostitution. Shame on you. You're the only guys I know that engage prostitutes. You repressive Saudis. I don't even know anybody that's ever been to a prostitute, except for you guys. And he's like, all right. And then he gave us our visas.
Oh, gosh. Consular affairs.
It can be used as a weapon.
Yeah, it definitely can. When you're at the embassy at this point, you were doing political and econ type work? Okay. And then what were like some highlights? What was something
that's an easy one.
Okay.
It was the uprising. So I had only been there for a couple of months, and in Bahrain they call the first intifada began. Listen, I love Bahrain. I love the Bahraini people. The Crown Prince and I still text each other with my phone. We still text each other all the time, jokes and memes and stuff. We went to college together. And but the truth is that the Shias were oppressed, right? If you're a Shia Muslim, you are not permitted to serve in the police, in the military, or in the intelligence services. Why? Just because you happen to be a Shia Muslim? It's not fair. That's not right. And, the Bahrainis would use a very heavy hand in dealing with peaceful pro-democracy demonstrations. When I say heavy hand, I mean they would open fire on unarmed crowds and kill people. And so the Shias began planting these homemade bombs. They killed a couple policemen. Then the Bahrainis responded by grabbing the bomb makers and summarily executing them. It got out of hand. The Bahrainis also made use of this cell that they had called the U group, which they were scary looking. They were all dressed in black. They had black masks and black hoods. They had machine guns. It turned out they were all Pakistanis, but this was like the Bahraini version of the special forces. And they would just like walk into a village and just open fire, just like that. I'd have to go and say, you can't justify doing something like this. They didn't care. They'd do it anyway.
And from the Saudi perspective, it was just way too close to home, too close to the Eastern Province. And
the Eastern Province is majority Shia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so do you think that was a legitimate concern for the Saudis that, the oil-rich province could face similar...
That's something that the Saudis have been afraid of for decades, that Bahrain's Shia are going to gain too many rights. Saudis, Shia, are going to get ideas about, dangerous ideas about democracy and human rights. So we should either arrest them or kill them now before things get out of hand. And that's what they did.
You pointed to something very interesting that I think goes often overlooked, and that's the use of Pakistan's military in the Gulf region.
Yes, and especially in Saudi Arabia.
Especially there. The
Although
relationship
Kuwait,
is deep.
Bahrain, the Emirates.
The relationship is deep. When you were in Pakistan, did you see elements of that?
There's deep and abiding love of Saudi Arabia in Pakistan. The Saudis have been very, very generous with the Pakistanis over the course of decades, to the point where Faisalabad is named after King Faisal. It's one of the largest cities in the country. I think it's the 4th largest city in the country. The Saudis, how am I going to say this? There are long-standing rumors that the Pakistanis have provided the Saudis with assistance in their nascent nuclear program. Put it that way. Yeah. So there's a very close and abiding relationship. Not to say that Pakistan's not, one of the poorer countries in the world. The Saudis haven't just given them a blank check. But the Saudis have been very kind over the years. Mm-hmm. And the Pakistanis are grateful for it.
Pardon me. Sorry, I'm still getting over this. So the nascent nuclear program, do you think it's like the Emiratis that, this is a source of power to diversify away from an oil-based economy to one that's more sustainable?
Well, but look at it this way. Listen, I'm all for diversification of energy, right? I think we all should be. But if you live in a desert country that has 330 days of sunlight a year, why would you not fill the desert with solar panels? Why would you want nuclear energy? That doesn't make any sense to me. It's something that has long worried policymakers in the West. Mm-hmm. The Abraham Accords, that this terrible, terrible idea that Donald Trump had, where he encouraged Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Morocco, Tunisia to open diplomatic relations with Israel. The bone that we threw to the Saudis was we wanted them to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. They would exchange ambassadors, open embassies in Tel Aviv and in Riyadh. And the Saudis said, yeah, we'll do that if you build us a nuclear reactor. Mm. But if the Saudis are not signatories to the non-proliferation treaty, what's to keep them from doing what the Iranians are doing and just enriching uranium for a nuclear bomb? And then who would they use it on?
Deterrence.
Maybe.
Like, the technology is moving so fast and it's such a concerning field. I mean, if this has been a concern since the 80s, just look at Pakistan getting a nuclear weapon. It reshaped the entire region's
yes, it did.
Power plays. And
oh my gosh. When I was in Pakistan, this was in March or April of 2002. The American embassy, there's a new American embassy in Islamabad. This was the last American embassy, which was gigantic. It was on something like 25 acres. It had apartment buildings. It had a nightclub. It had the chancery. It had everything. It was a self-contained community. So the cafeteria was gigantic. It could hold hundreds of people at once. And on the weekends, it doubled as a nightclub. And we would have this Filipino cover band come in. The disco ball is turning, and it was, it was a nightclub. So I have a colleague who once jokingly said she could set her watch by when I had lunch every day, just as the clock struck 12. I'm a creature of habit in that respect. So one day I went down to the cafeteria with a very junior officer who was working for me right at 12, right? And this cafeteria could hold 300, 400 people. We were the only people in the cafeteria. So we get our food, and she looks around and she goes, "Where is everybody?" And I said, "Are you kidding me?" And she said, "No, where is everybody?" I said, "They've been evacuated. We're the only ones left." She goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because India's going to fire a nuclear missile at us. We're on the brink of nuclear war right now with India." And she said, "We are?" And I said, "Didn't you notice that helicopter in the parking lot?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "It's here to rescue us." She goes, "Oh my God, I have to start reading the papers. I've been so busy on Al-Qaeda. We're trying to find Al-Qaeda." She goes, I haven't even paid any attention. And I said, that's why there's nobody, like literally nobody in the embassy except the CIA and a handful of FBI agents. That was it. because the Pakistanis and the Indians are constantly on the brink of something terrible.
Is there still that risk between India and Pakistan going?
Yes. I will say a senior Pakistani military officer told me recently that the Pakistani government has placed command and control of their nuclear arsenal under the command of an American general. And so that's good enough for the Indians. And the Indians have backed off. Good. So the threat that we had in 2002 of nuclear war between the two doesn't exist today.
Okay, so I am curious about something that was concerning to me at the time because Pakistan is a nuclear power. When you were in Pakistan, you were doing counterterrorism ops, but on a big strategic picture, there was always the concern that Al-Qaeda could reach or get or infiltrate the people that were in control of a nuclear weapon.
Absolutely.
And that is what really frightens me. Do you think that risk still exists?
I think it's been vastly diminished. Where the risk exists is in nuclear material that had been in the custody of former Soviet republics that kind of struggle with the rule of law, right? So nuclear fissile material, let's say, or even nuclear waste sometimes goes missing in places like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. Well, goes missing where? It's got to be somewhere. Is it in the hands of Al-Qaeda? It turned out no. ISIS? The Chechens? We don't know. We don't know where it is. So there's always going to be that question mark.
Frightening.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about being a creature of habit. Yet you were very
Not
good.
in Greece.
So at surveillance detection and changing up your routine and changing routes. How did that serve you?
Surveillance and surveillance detection.
Yeah.
One of the lessons that I learned, first in my CIA training and then in my 2 years in Athens, was to never, ever, ever set a pattern of behavior. Because as soon as they see a pattern, they're going to kill you. In Greece, it was Revolutionary Organization 17 November, which was so successful and so deadly that by far it was the biggest challenge that we had to our security in the country. But like I say, as an exemplar, I'll tell you, when I arrived in Pakistan, back then you had to transit London. There were no direct flights to Dubai. The planes couldn't go that far. So I go from Washington to London, London to Kuwait, Kuwait to Islamabad, and you arrive at 4 o'clock in the morning. So the driver said, "Oh, we've put you up at the Marriott." I said, "Absolutely not. I'm not staying at the Marriott. For 6 months?"
And it was always such a target.
And I said, "What's the one place they're going to blow up? It's going to be the Marriott." I said, "I'm not staying at the Marriott." I spent the first night there, and I moved into a 16-room guest house, totally, completely off the radar. Sure enough, 6 weeks later, they blew up the Marriott, killed 100 and something people. It was a disaster. So every day, I would leave the guest house at a different time, and I would take a different circuitous route to the embassy. Every single day. And we would work, on a slow day, we would work 12 hours. Usually I'd work 14, 15, occasionally 16 hours. We were exhausted. But we had to find Osama bin Laden. So I would take an equally nonsensical, circuitous route back from the embassy to the guest house. One day, I leave the guest house, and I noticed there's a guy on a motorcycle wearing a red helmet, and he's trying really hard to stay in my blind spot. And I thought, oh, no, this isn't good. So I'd speed up, he'd speed up. I'd slow down, he'd slow down. And he was just on me. So I'm doing this route that just doesn't make any sense, and he's on me the whole time. I get to the entrance to the diplomatic quarter, and he breaks off. And I thought, that's not good. So we have this database, this surveillance detection database, and I put in all my information, where I started, where I ended, what I saw, license plate, description, time of the day, all that stuff. So I worked like 14 hours that day. So when I arrived, it was dark. When I left, it was also dark. And I come out of the embassy. It took me about a quarter of a mile to get out of the diplomatic quarter. And then he's on me again. And I thought, oh my God. I couldn't believe it. And I'm taking this, again, completely nonsensical route that nobody in his right mind would take to get back to the guest house. Barely slept that night. I was so upset. Set an alarm for 5 a.m. Got up, opened the door of the guest house just a crack, and I looked up and down the street. I didn't see anything. They had issued us these mirrors on a stick, so I'm looking under my car. I don't see any bombs. I don't see any tracking devices. I get in the car. It's like 5:30 in the morning. I start driving. I go like a block, and he's on me again. And I was like, oh my God. So I got to the embassy. He broke off at the entrance to the DQ where there's heavy security. I waited until about 7 when the security officer arrived. And I said, listen, I'm under surveillance. I'm 100% sure that I'm under surveillance. And I explained to him what I had seen. Now, there's a very specific definition of surveillance. Mm-hmm. It's multiple sightings at time and distance. So you see the person several times at different places and at different times of the day. So he said, okay, well, we gotta wait for the chief to come in. So the chief came in about 8 o'clock. We went to see him, and I said the same thing. I'm 100% sure that I'm under surveillance. And he said, okay, well, you know what you have to do. And I said, I know. And he said, you never popped your cherry that way, did you? And I said, nope, never needed to. He said, well, we're going to have teams out there. You're not going to be alone. Don't worry. We're going to get the guy. Well, I was very worried. It's all I could think about. I couldn't get any work done that day. Now, there were 6 old-timers, 6 retirees, senior intelligence service, former deputy director for operations, associate deputy director for operations, 3 retired heads of Near East operations who had come back after 9/11 as contractors and were working for me. So they're patting me on the back. Don't worry, buddy. We're all going to be out there. Don't worry. Everybody's armed. That day, at 3 in the afternoon, I had a meeting at a safe house that we shared with the Pakistani intelligence service. We used to use it to interrogate prisoners. So I went. It was previously scheduled. And I would go almost every day, and we would interview people that we had captured. And I did the interview, and I got up to walk out, and I stopped, and I turned, and I said to the brigadier general, who was my counterpart, I said, General Muhammad, are you following me? And he said, no, why? And I said, I'm under surveillance. I'm positive that I'm under surveillance, and I'm going to kill the guy this afternoon. And he said, no, it's not us. I never saw the guy again. So we learned weeks later that these Pakistani intelligence guys were sitting around one day, and they were talking about me. And one of them said, he's really a nice guy. And another one said, you know what? Nobody's that nice. He's probably nice because he wants to trick us into thinking that he's not working against us. I bet he's spying on us. We don't know what he does when he's not here. So they put the worst surveillance officer in the entire Pakistani intelligence service on me. And I was genuinely going to kill him that afternoon. It was a lark that I stopped to ask the general if they were surveilling me. Yeah, and they were.
Would you have?
Absolutely. And then I got to Greece. in 98 to work against Revolutionary Organization 17 November. And these guys were the masters at pre-operational surveillance. In Greek, they were called the Phantom Organization because not only had none of them ever been caught, none of them had ever even been identified. They killed the CIA station chief. They killed 2 U.S. defense attachés. They killed an Air Force enlisted man. They killed the Turkish ambassador, the Turkish deputy ambassador. They killed 6 ministers. They killed the governor of the central bank, businessmen, ship owners, and nobody had even been identified. So 17 November was that deadly of a group, and we really had to be like perfect practitioners of surveillance detection. When I got home from Athens, I actually became a surveillance detection instructor at the CIA. It was so burned into my consciousness.
Do you still find yourself doing surveillance detection?
Every day.
Yeah.
Every single day.
It's good practice.
It really is.
At the time, too, it was like the leftist communist organization, or not communist, leftist terrorist organizations were really advanced and
it's quaint now when you think about it. But
like
it was
Carlos
all about
the Jackal
communist terror. Oh my God, I spent a majority of my time working on issues in some way related to Carlos the Jackal. It's amazing to me. I teach a class at this university in Spain. It's a graduate school class, the history of terrorism, and it was shocking to me that nobody knew who Carlos the Jackal was. Shocking.
Even in Spain.
Even in Spain, where he was active.
Wow.
So Carlos the Jackal was a Venezuelan national named Ilyich Ramirez Sanchez. And this guy there was even a movie based on him called The Day of the Jackal. This guy was a terrorist powerhouse. He actually succeeded in kidnapping every member of OPEC's oil ministers summit.
I remember that.
In the 1970s.
Yeah, I remember that story. I wasn't alive yet, but yes, I remember.
Every OPEC minister of oil.
Can you imagine?
At once. And they paid like $100 million ransom. And the reason why we were interested in Carlos was that every time we had a terrorist, every time we would recruit a terrorist or one would volunteer for us or, we would have an access agent bring back information, it always pointed back to Carlos. Carlos was always the guy that was arranging the training or that was acting as the middleman for the weapons. And so we knew that Carlos had worked with the Libyan government. He had worked with the IRA. And as you said a moment ago, there were communist terrorist groups in every Western European country. Red Brigades, Action Directe, the Baader Meinhof Gang, Popular Revolutionary Struggle. They were everywhere, the IRA. And so Carlos had his fingers in all of it. And we knew that the Greeks were getting their weapons from Carlos. We just didn't know how. We ended up capturing Carlos. It's a fascinating story. I worked with a guy, an old-timer, who's now dead. He lived well into his 90s, named Billy Waugh. Billy was a bona fide American hero. He had fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. 17 Purple Hearts, one short of the record for the United States. And then he became a CIA contractor after the Vietnam War. He was doing some contract work for the CIA in Sudan, in Khartoum. And he had a day off. And so he went to the souk, to the vegetable market, to buy some vegetables. And he's just buying vegetables. And he sees this guy. And he says to a colleague of his who had gone with him, "That's Carlos the Jackal." The guy says, "Are you out of your mind?" He said, "I'm telling you, that's Carlos the Jackal." They run back to the embassy. The station chief at the time was Khobar Black, who became famously the chief of the CIA's counterterrorism center, and then Ambassador Khobar Black, the State Department's special envoy for counterterrorism. So the way Billy told the story, Khobar was on an elliptical machine in his office, and Billy barges in and says, Khobar, I just saw Carlos the Jackal. And Khobar says, get the fuck out of here. He said, I'm telling you, I was in the vegetable market, and I saw Carlos the Jackal. Well, where did he go? He said, I don't know. I ran here to tell you. He said, well, what do we do with that information? You're going to have to find him, find where he lives. Billy went back to the souk every single day for a month. And they found him. So what they did is they paid these two Sudanese guys to get into a fist fight. As you know, in the Middle East, fist fights are very unusual events. And so when one breaks out, and I saw this once in Damascus, a big circle will form around the two combatants, and people will, cheer them on and stand there and watch because it's just so rare an event. Carlos is there craning to see the two guys fighting, and Billy has a camera, click, 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 click. And then they discreetly follow him back to his house. They note the location. They go back to the station, process the film, send it back to headquarters. Headquarters says, it's Carlos the Jackal. Then they came up with the most ingenious plan. They recruited his dentist. Right? They followed him for months. They recruited his dentist. Then they broke into his house and they put ground glass in his tube of toothpaste. So every time he brushed his teeth, his gums would bleed. And he's like, oh my God, I must have gum disease. I better go to the dentist. He goes to the dentist. He makes this appointment. The dentist tips us off. He made an appointment. He's coming in, Tuesday at 10. Carlos goes in. The dentist says, oh, you have gum disease. I'm going to give you a little bit of gas. Gives him the gas, knocks him out. Carlos wakes up on a French Air Force plane back to Paris, where he was charged with the murder of 7 French policemen. And now he's serving life without parole.
Mm-hmm. Whoa, glass in the toothpaste. Holy shoot.
People who are watching this might say, that's nonsense. Why don't you just go in the house and grab him? Well, you can't, because he lives in a heavily populated area. He's the only white guy in the area. You're all white guys. You can't be staking out this other white guy's house. Word's going to spread like wildfire. They're going to tip off the Sudanese government. You can't do that. If he's at the dentist's office, right? You just load him into an ambulance. Looks like an unconscious guy, maybe had a heart attack or whatever.
Yeah.
And the ambulance drives to
and
the
in those
plane.
situations, time is your biggest asset.
You bet it is.
Wow. And what a surgical move.
Billy became a legend at the CIA for that operation.
For that? Mm-hmm. I was wondering, what are some of the defining moments in his career? I mean, he's done so much, like you said, but that's definitely...
Billy was also so full of crap. He and I became friends. We did this thing together in Abu Dhabi that was just so much fun. And we were there for months and months. So we struck up a real friendship. And then 9/11 happened. And I didn't see him for like 6 weeks. And I ran into him in the hall. And I said, Billy, where you been? And he looks around to make sure nobody's nearby. And he says, I've been in Afghanistan. I said, really? What are you doing in Afghanistan? And he looks at me like I'm crazy. And he says, I've been killing people. What do you think I've been doing? I was like, of course, because I kept volunteering. And they're like, no, we don't need any translators. I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, it's because they weren't interrogating anybody. They were just killing them. So they didn't need John the translator to go,
But at that point, you were already in CT at that point, mm-hmm. right? So you weren't just a translator.
No.
You were already a case officer.
You'd
done Greece. Yeah. So clearly wanted to go.
Yeah.
Post 9/11.
I volunteered 4 times.
So.
And finally I said to the deputy director, Khobar's assistant, he was an old friend of mine and a former boss. I said, look, if you don't send me to Afghanistan right now, I am walking straight to Exxon with my Arabic and I am not looking back. He's like, relax. All right. Can you go to Pakistan? I said, yes. When? He said, tomorrow. I said, yes. What do you want me to do there? He said, chief of counterterrorism operations. I said, fine.
Done.
Yeah. So I called my then girlfriend. She later became my wife. She worked a couple floors above me. I said, I got to go to Pakistan tomorrow. She said, for how long? I said, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months? And she said, okay, I'll meet you at your place after work and help you pack. And so I left the next day.
Wow. And, you went with this great ambition. You'd also already done so much in your own career with Greece. What, at this point, did you kind of catch wind of like the radical Islam issue sort of, starting to percolate in the background pre 9/11?
When I was what they call reading in to the Greece files, that took like a year, okay? And it was interspersed with training. So in that year, we had the, USS Cole bombing. We had the double embassy bombings in Africa. And then, I tell this story in my first book. It was July the 6th, 2001. Remember it clear as day. Part of my job in the Counterterrorism Center was to entertain visiting counterterrorism officers from foreign intelligence services. So there was a group from a Middle Eastern country, and this is all very pro forma, right? You schedule briefings for them through the day on whatever issues are important to them, and then you exchange gifts, and then you take them to the director's office, and they get a picture shaking the director's hand, and then you take them to a really expensive steakhouse that night.
Sorry, I'm just going to bring this a little
sorry.
closer.
You bet. So I had scheduled a briefing, a 30-minute briefing for them with a junior CTC analyst on Al-Qaeda. And so when it was time for the briefing, instead of the junior analyst, in walks Khobar with the chief of operations for what was called the Alex Station, the Osama bin Laden group. And I stood up like, oh my God.
Unexpected.
Yeah. And I said, gentlemen, let me introduce Khobar Black. Mr. Black is the director of counterterrorism for the CIA. And this is, the director of operations for the Osama bin Laden unit. Khobar sat down and he started off by saying, something terrible is going to happen. We don't know what and we don't know where, but we know that it's going to be an attack on an unprecedented scale. He said, we're hearing the most disturbing chatter. We're hearing Al-Qaeda camp commanders on the phone with their students, and they're crying and telling them, I'll see you in paradise. We're hearing code words for a massive attack. The honey salesman is coming with vast quantities of honey. There's going to be a great wedding with thousands of people invited. There's going to be a huge football match, right? All code for an attack. And he says, I'm begging you, if you have any sources inside Al-Qaeda, please help us. And they just sat there. We didn't have any sources in Al-Qaeda, neither did they, or anybody else. And so he leaves. That night, I sent them back to the hotel. I said, I'll pick you up in 2 hours to go to dinner. And I went to Khobar's office to thank him for the briefing. And I said, Khobar, I got to ask you, was that for their benefit, or were you serious? And he said, oh, I'm deadly serious. Something terrible is going to happen. And then 2 months later, it happened.
He kept on trying to alert other intel agencies around D.C.
He said in the 9/11 Commission that he and Dick Clark, who was they called him the counterterrorism czar he was the senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council. They were screaming it from the rooftops. And then George Tenet, same thing, screaming it from the rooftops. They're going to hit us. And then in July of that year was the now infamous President's Daily Brief article, Bin Laden determined to attack in U.S. And Condi Rice said, I wish you guys would get this counterterrorism thing out of your heads. The threat is China. Well, guess what? The threat was not China. The threat was Al-Qaeda. And 3,000 people died needlessly because of it.
Yeah, horrible, horrible day. And I would love if you could share the experience that you had when you were at the agency on the day of 9/11.
Sure.
And some of the leadership that you saw come out of that day.
Yeah, so that day, Khobar and I had a 9 a.m. appointment with Condoleezza Rice. This was before she was Secretary of State. She was the National Security Advisor. And I'm going to use the word quaint again. It was a very quaint reason. It's laughable now that we needed to see somebody as important as Condoleezza Rice. The government printing office, the GPO, was getting ready to publish a book of historical State Department cables. And it was called Foreign Relations of the United States, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, 1947 to 1969. Okay? Nobody's ever going to read this book. Maybe there's a PhD candidate in history, maybe that someday might reference it. But nobody's really going to read this book. But of the thousands of cables that are included in this thing, there were 3 that mentioned CIA sources who were still alive. So we have to at least offer them relocation, $1 million to live on, relocate their families. 17 November was still a threat. And we couldn't take the chance of somebody saying, some Greek reporter, oh my God, look, there are these 3 guys. They worked for the CIA in 1952 and, they're still alive. So we made an appointment with Condi Rice to ask her to just pull these 3 cables out. Nobody would know, right? She's like, absolutely not. We said, well, we need to see you in person. So we made the appointment for 9 a.m. At 8, I got a call from the driver saying that he was waiting for us at the west entrance and he's going to take us to the White House. So I go up to Khobar's office to tell him that the car's ready. And his secretary, she had a little TV on her desk. Back then, you couldn't watch TV on your computer back then. So she has the TV on and the news is on and one of the towers of the World Trade Center is burning. And I said, what happened to the World Trade Center? And she said, a plane flew into it. And I said, because I'm an idiot sometimes, I said, that happened once before. In 1932, a bomber flew into the Empire State Building, but it was really foggy and raining then. It's crystal clear today. Like, how can you not see that you're flying into the World Trade Center? And just as the words came out of my mouth, the second plane hit. And then she turned to me and she said, did you see that? Or did I imagine it? And I ran back to my office and I said, guys, 2 planes just hit both towers of the World Trade Center. I think we're under attack. Everybody ran back up to Khobar's office because we had TVs mounted coming down from the ceiling above his office. So we had CNN, MSNBC, Fox, BBC, RT. Back then it was called Russia Today. Or back then I think it was even called Russian television. France 5, whatever. And then a plane hits the Pentagon. And it's silence. I mean, there are like 300 of us. We're working in this enormous bullpen. So around the walls, there are private offices for the leadership. Khobar, the Deputy Director for Analysis, Deputy Director for Operations, Deputy Director for Military Affairs, couple division chiefs that I probably shouldn't say what their offices are. But anyway, and then 300 of us are in these cubicles. And there were so many people that the aisles were named as streets, like Bin Laden Boulevard, Winston Wiley Way. He had been a former head of counterterrorism. So they were named after CIA directors and terrorists. And so you could say, I'm in a cubicle at the intersection of Bin Laden Boulevard and Winston Wiley Way. Mm-hmm. So silence as we're watching this unfold. And you might remember Well, no, because you were overseas at the time. But on the ticker, it's like car bomb goes off in front of the State Department, which turned out to not be true. There was no car bomb. Rumors of rocket fired at White House. There was no rocket fired at the White House. But people were panicking.
Of course.
And then somebody behind me shouts, "Will somebody please lead?" And Khobar was like someone had slapped him. Right. You, go to the director's office and tell him this. You, go to security. You, go to operations. You know. Finally, one of the CIA cops, the CIA has its own police force. It's called the SPOs, the Special Protective Officers. So Special Protective Service, SPS. He comes in and he says, "Everybody evacuate." We were like, yeah, right. We're the counterterrorism center. So nobody budged. One woman ran for her life. She and I used to sit next to each other. She ran for her life. And a couple of days later, all 5 of her branch members, she was the branch chief, they went to Khobar and said, "We've lost confidence in her leadership." And she was fired. I mean, imagine that day we had like 800 employees in the counterterrorism center. It more than doubled after that, but she was the only one who ran away. They fired her.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to...
It's moments like that, that are going to define what, are you capable of leading?
Right. If you're going to run away at the first sign of trouble, maybe you should be working on France or trade, right? Or Canada or something. Not on terrorism. No. So another hour passed and the cops came back and said, "If you don't evacuate now, we'll place you under arrest." So everybody evacuated. Now I lived about, let me think, 5 miles from headquarters. It took me 2 hours just to get out of the parking lot. And I got about halfway and I had to abandon my car on the George Washington Parkway. It was just gridlock, parking lot. So I just pulled onto the median, got out, walked away. I went to my apartment. My, as I said, then girlfriend, later became my wife, also evacuated. And we met at my place, went to the roof of the building, watched the Pentagon burn for a while. Then we went out and we tried to donate blood. But the bloodmobile, there were bloodmobiles all over the place. And the lines went for blocks. And they told us there's a 24-hour wait to donate blood. And finally, I said to her, "This is ridiculous. We got to get back to work." So I walked back to my car, drove across the median, drove back to CIA headquarters, and then I didn't leave for 4 days. I just slept under the desk. I balled up my jacket and used it as a pillow, and I just stayed for the next 4 days. Everybody did. We had to take bolt cutters and cut the lock off the cafeteria doors, and then we just stole all the food. We cooked it ourselves, laid it out on folding tables in the hall so people could graze, and then we had to write the Marriott. The Marriott owned the company. It was called Saga back then. They had the contract for the CIA cafeterias. We had to write a check for $10,000 for all the food that we took. Yeah, but everybody just stayed.
Yeah. At the time, it really rooted out people that maybe were at the agency for, just the paycheck, and the ones that really had the passion for doing something, the mission, protect America and preserve, our well-being at the time. And it also brought in a whole new wave, a generation of people.
Let me interrupt you on that point. Before 9/11, we had 200 applicants for every position. After 9/11, we had 2,500 applicants for every position.
Yeah, it's remarkable. You really see the patriotism start to, come out at that time. It's something I think to be proud of. But, like with any organization, when you start bringing in troves of people, the culture changes. And so
Very much so.
What type of culture shift in the agency did you see?
Yeah. Call me old-fashioned, but, the original mission of the CIA was very clear and very simple. It was to recruit spies, to steal secrets, and then to analyze those secrets to provide the best analysis possible for policymakers to make policy. Simple as that. Immediately post 9/11, the CIA became a paramilitary organization, borrowing from special forces from every one of the branches of the military, setting up in-house, for lack of a better term, assassination squads. And with the power of a presidential executive order, sending these teams all around the world to either kill or kidnap people who had been deemed to pose what's called a clear and present danger to the United States, to American citizens, or American facilities. After that, we had a torture program, a secret prison program, a rendition program, an extraordinary rendition program, which is so patently illegal from any aspect. There's a big difference between rendition and extraordinary rendition that I think most people don't really have a feel for. So rendition is quite simple. Let's say you are Egyptian, right? And I catch you in Pakistan. And you don't have any plausible reason for being in Pakistan. And I send you back to Egypt. That's a rendition. Okay? Now, I know they're going to be rough on you in Egypt, but you're Egyptian. So, tough luck. An extraordinary rendition is you're Egyptian. I catch you in Pakistan. You have no plausible explanation for what you're doing there. And I send you to Algeria or Syria or Israel. And we say, don't tell anybody he's here. Soften him up a little bit, which is, the wink and the nod for a torture program. And then just give us a transcript of what he says when you're done with him. And nobody knows you're there. We disappear hundreds of people that way. No one ever has any idea, well, whatever happened to that guy, that Egyptian guy that we knew? He just disappeared one day. That's extraordinary rendition.
And okay, so when you first went to Pakistan and you're heading counterterrorism in Pakistan, but then, you're on a mission to capture high-value targets, and at the time, this was part of the program. Mm-hmm. And so...
And I was a true believer in those early days. First of all, there was no torture program yet, right? 9/11 was an open criminal investigation. 3,000 Americans had been murdered. And so we wanted to bring these people to justice.
Do you think that the extraordinary renditions that were taking place, they did involve extracting information? Mm-hmm. It wasn't done under centralized American hands. Mm-hmm. I've always heard that people would rather be captured under the Americans than captured under some of the other countries that, we're aware of. So
absolutely. That's why,
like you mentioned Syria, it's like, people.
That's why all the Nazis came to the United States.
Yeah.
They were so afraid of the Soviets after the Second World War.
I'd love if you can elaborate a little bit on the experience of, what started to change your perception of, it was like we were changing. Like, what happened?
We changed. Boy, did we change. The torture program is what changed me. It flipped me very quickly for several reasons. One specific and one general. The general reason I'll start with. We have a law in this country called the Federal Torture Act of 1946. And it specifically prohibits exactly the techniques that we used against Al-Qaeda prisoners. It's against the law. Can't do it. It's a felony. Okay? In 1946, under that law, we executed Japanese soldiers who had waterboarded American POWs. That was a death penalty charge. If you waterboarded someone, you got the death penalty. Fast forward to January of 1968. The Washington Post publishes a photograph on the front page of an American soldier waterboarding a North Vietnamese prisoner. The Secretary of Defense at the time, Robert McNamara, sees that picture, orders an investigation. The soldier is arrested. He's charged with torture, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years at hard labor at Leavenworth. But then, like magic, in 2002, it's all legal. Well, the law never changed. The law was never amended. We changed. And we just decided we don't like that law anymore. We're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. Number one. Number two, we captured Abu Zubaydah at the end of March 2002. We were able to narrow his possible location down to 13 separate sites. And so we decided to raid all 13 sites simultaneously. And sure enough, he was in one of the sites. He was in the one that we thought he was going to be in. I gave very specific orders that night to take him alive. And this idiot Pakistani policeman shot him 3 times with an AK-47. Abu Zubaydah and 2 others had climbed the roof of the safe house they were in, and they were jumping to the roof of the next door house to try to escape. And this policeman was just poof, shooting, poof, shooting again. He killed the first guy. The first guy was a bomb maker from Syria. Killed him dead before he hit the ground. Abu Zubaydah he shot in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach with this AK-47. And Abu Zubaydah's bodyguard was shot in the leg. So it took about 6 weeks for him to recover enough to be interrogated. We send him to this secret prison. And normally the CIA always has jurisdiction overseas. The FBI always has jurisdiction domestically. But, as I said, 9/11 was an open criminal investigation. And so the FBI had the lead, even in the secret CIA prison. So the FBI assigns a translator named Ali Soufan, who's an ethnic Egyptian, great guy, skilled interrogator, to interrogate Abu Zubaydah. And Ali did exactly what the FBI has done since the Nuremberg trials in 1945 and 1946. He established a rapport with Abu Zubaydah, a relationship. It took several weeks. But what you do is you offer him a cup of tea, an orange, a cigarette, paper, and a pen so he can write to his mother. And you establish a level of trust. Finally, Abu Zubaydah began to open up and gave us actionable intelligence that saved American lives. There were 2 things in particular that Abu Zubaydah gave to Ali. We didn't know anything about the Al-Qaeda wiring diagram, for example. We knew bin Laden was the top, Ayman al-Zawahiri was the number 2, Mohammed Atef was number 3, but we killed him in Tora Bora in October of 2001. And then we just didn't know how the rest of the organization was structured. We just had no sources. So Abu Zubaydah explained the structure of Al-Qaeda to the point where, and I use this as an example all the time, Ali could ask, if you were going to do an operation in Dusseldorf, how would you do that? And Abu Zubaydah said, well, there's this guy, Mohammed, he's in Dusseldorf, and here's his address, and he has access to guns, and his cousin, Abdullah, this is his address, Abdullah has access to ammunition, and then there's a friend of theirs, Rashid, they met at the coffee house, and Rashid knows how to build bombs. So then we could go to the Germans and say, you have a serious problem in Dusseldorf, and this is who you need to be looking for. And then they can bust down the door and grab these guys, and now there's no Al-Qaeda cell in Dusseldorf. Number 1. Number 2, we didn't know who had planned 9/11. I mean, by all accounts, bin Laden wasn't that bright that he could come up with this on his own. And we knew that there was this very bad man out there going by the nom de guerre Mukhtar, right? Mukhtar was the mastermind of 9/11. We didn't know who he was. What we did know was that in 1996, somebody going by the name Mukhtar had planned something called the Bojinka operation. The Bojinka operation was a plan to hijack a dozen 747s from Manila Airport and to fly them into buildings all up and down the west coast of the United States. Mukhtar had gone out to lunch. He left his apartment and he went out to lunch, and a cleaning lady went into the apartment to clean it. And she sees these papers on a table. She said, "This looks like a terrorist attack." She calls the police. The police come and they say, "This looks like a terrorist attack. We're going to call the Filipino Intelligence Service." And then they come and say, "Oh, this looks like a terrorist attack. We better call the CIA." And the CIA wrapped it all up, and Mukhtar escaped. Abu Zubaydah thought that was hilarious. He said, "You don't know who Mukhtar is?" And Ali said, "No." And he said, "His name is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed." We had never heard that name before. So we do a name trace, and it's like, oh my God, he spent his senior year in high school in North Carolina. He graduated from North Carolina A&T. Like, how could this guy possibly have been radicalized? He's practically American. And then the hunt was on. And then 13 months later, we got him in a safe house in Rawalpindi. And we've had him ever since. That's what Abu Zubaydah did for us. Now, the rest of the story is quite terrible. It's that 9/11 was the worst intelligence failure in American history. The CIA had the blood of 3,000 innocent American civilians on its hand. And there was this deep desire for revenge. And so the CIA solicited from these two contract psychologists, James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, something that they called an enhanced interrogation program. I call a torture program. They charged the CIA $108 million and said, "Here's your program. Why don't you let us fly out to the secret site, and we're gonna tenderize this guy, because you know he's withholding information on the next attack, right? He knows he's the number 3 in Al Qaeda," which he was not. So Robert Mueller at the time was the FBI director. He knew exactly what this meant. And not only did he pull his personnel out of the secret site, Mueller ordered every FBI employee to leave the country where the secret site was located. He said, "I don't want to have anything to do with this. It's a torture program." And Mitchell and Jessen began to torture Abu Zubaydah mercilessly. So here was the great disconnect. The CIA and the FBI historically had hated each other so deeply that even their computer systems were incompatible. So Ali is debriefing Abu Zubaydah every day. He's writing up these brilliant debriefing cables, sending them to the FBI, and the FBI is not sharing them with anybody. So when a CIA cable is written, it normally goes to the CIA, to the White House, to the Defense Department, to NSA, and to the State Department, not to the FBI. Mitchell and Jessen begin to torture Abu Zubaydah on August the 2nd, 2002. And he immediately goes silent, just clams up. He can't believe this is happening to him. He told Ali Soufan everything he wanted to know. And now these strangers come and they're beating him and drowning him, and he actually had to be resuscitated once after a waterboarding session. His heart stopped beating, and they revived him so they could torture him more. He had mentioned that he had this irrational fear of cockroaches, so they built a coffin, put a diaper on him, put him in the coffin, put a box of cockroaches in with him all over his body, nailed the coffin shut, would open it once a day to change his diaper and give him food. And then they kept him in there for 2 weeks just to make him go insane. They made him play Russian roulette. They threatened to kill his mother. They beat him until he had brain damage. None of this stuff was approved by the Justice Department. None of it was a part of the formal so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. But here's the real crime. They told us, we're starting the enhanced interrogation today. He went silent, as I said. But at headquarters, we didn't know what Ali Soufan was reporting back to the FBI. So they took Ali Soufan's cables, they retyped them in the CIA computer system and said, oh my gosh, look what he gave us. We waterboarded him one time. Somebody better call the Germans and tell them about Dusseldorf. And we need to look for this guy named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And at the CIA, people are like, holy shit, this actually works.
Yeah, so, the belief was that Al-Mukhtar became known because of the enhanced interrogation. But what you're saying is that it was already through
that's the big lie.
Dialogue.
That's the big lie. And that lie was perpetuated in Hollywood with the dangerous movie Zero Dark 30, which the CIA actively contributed to. That's a whole other story. But Zero Dark 30 perpetuated the lie that the torture program led to bin Laden's location. And it was because of the torture program that we were able to find bin Laden and to kill him. That is just not true. Great analysis led to the location of bin Laden.
What a revelation. And then, you have a moral and ethical problem with this.
Yes. I went back to headquarters from Pakistan in the summer of 2002, and I was approached by a senior officer in counterterrorism who asked if I wanted to be trained in these enhanced interrogation techniques. I'd never heard that term before. And I said, what's that mean? He goes, we're going to start getting rough with these guys. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he explained these techniques. I said, ooh, that sounds like a torture program to me. He said, it's not torture. The president approved it. And I said, I don't know, man. Let me think about it. So I went up to the 7th floor. There was a very, very senior officer there for whom I had worked in the Middle East 10 years earlier. I knocked on his door and I said, I need some advice. I said, they just asked me if I want to be trained in these enhanced interrogation techniques. What do you think of this? And he said, first, let's call a spade a spade. This is a torture program. They can use whatever euphemism they want, but this is a torture program. Secondly, torture is a slippery slope. And you know how these guys are. Somebody's going to go overboard. They're going to kill a prisoner. When that happens, there's going to be a congressional investigation, and then there's going to be a Justice Department investigation, and somebody's going to go to prison. You want to go to prison? I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. It turned out I was the only person who went to prison. But I went back downstairs. I said, this is a torture program. I have a moral and ethical problem with it. I think it's illegal, and I don't want any part of it. I was passed over for promotion. Mind you, I just caught Abu Zubaydah. I was passed over for promotion. And in my promotion panel, Khobar Black's successor said that I had displayed a shocking lack of commitment to counterterrorism. Those were the words he used to deny me a promotion. The man that I had gone upstairs to see overrode that rejection and promoted me. And then I went upstairs to be the deputy director's assistant. So anyway, we start getting these cables back that, we waterboarded him one time. He gave us Mukhtar. He gave us Dusseldorf. And I said to a colleague, maybe I'm wrong about this. I still think it's reprehensible. But it looks like it's actually working. Well, it wasn't working. It was all a lie. It was all information stolen from Ali Soufan. So...
And you learned this later.
We learned it years later. The CIA internally learned it in 2005 when the Inspector General did an inspection, an investigation, and it wasn't made public until 2009 when it was finally declassified. 2009, 7 years after the fact, it was finally declassified.
John, I have a question about you mentioning that Abu Zubaydah was not Al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
What does that matter?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I always just wonder that because it's, he was a logistics guy.
Yeah.
Essentially, every terrorist that was Al-Qaeda and others needed this guy. It's so interesting to me as well that I just see this like parallel between him and Carlos the Jackal. You have they're two spectrums.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's like two spectrums of a terrorist wheel. You have the leftist Carlos the Jackal. He's, incredibly skilled at logistics. And then, with Abu Zubaydah, it's the same thing. He was with a Syrian bomb maker. So, he knew all these guys and he was essential to the operational success of Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
So what does it matter if he's Al-Qaeda or not?
At the time, it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. At the time, even if we had known he was not the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, he was still a very dangerous, very bad man, right? He was the logistics guy. He created the House of Martyrs, the Al-Qaeda safe house in Peshawar, Pakistan. He founded the 2 training camps in Helmand and Kandahar provinces in southern Afghanistan. If you wanted to get in to Afghanistan to fight the Americans, he would get you in. If you were tired of the fight and wanted to get out and go home, he would get you a fake passport and a plane ticket, and he would get you home. Bad guy. He had never joined Al-Qaeda. He had never pledged fealty to Osama bin Laden, and he had literally nothing to do with 9/11. So, he's been in Guantanamo. He's been in American custody for 22 years. He's been in Guantanamo since 2007. If he was not a member of Al-Qaeda, if he was not one of the masterminds of 9/11, then hasn't he served his time? I spoke to his attorney 2 months ago, and the attorney said that he was deeply involved in talks with the U.S. government to release Abu Zubaydah. He's never been charged with a crime. He's been incarcerated for, it's going to be 23 years in March. And the only sticking point was they were having trouble finding a country that would take him. We've resettled like bona fide bad guys from Guantanamo all over the world. Everywhere from Switzerland to Albania to Fiji to Belize, they're all over the world. They're having a little bit of trouble finding some place for Abu Zubaydah. But now Donald Trump is going to be the president. And Donald Trump is on the record as saying that nobody will be released from Guantanamo, ever. So I don't know where it stands. Is he just going to have to waste away there for another 4 years because Joe Biden couldn't get his act together? I don't know. I said to the attorney too, would you do me a favor? And it sounds odd, I said, but would you tell him that I send my best regards? And he said, actually, I told him I was going to talk to you, and he sends his best regards. And he said to tell you 2 things. Number 1, he hopes that the 2 of you can have dinner together as free men. Number 2, he said, you really did give them hope in 2007, because when you went public about the torture program, a friendly guard at Guantanamo told them a CIA man went public about what happened to you. You may actually get out of this. And he said, for the first time, they actually had hope that the legal system would work the way it was supposed to work. Now, most of them have been released. There's something like 17 left at Guantanamo, down from 900 or something like that, almost all of whom were innocent of any crime. But Abu Zubaydah ought to be the next to be released, and I hope he is. He doesn't deserve to be held there. Not anymore.
If there is going to ever be reform within the agency, you would be the first person that's called.
Thank you.
Because whether or not people agree or disagree, it's something that you've been true to yourself and true to your cause and your belief that, human rights is
unwavering in this position.
Yeah, I mean, human rights is such a key fundamental to who John is. And so, I always think that, perhaps you would end up being that person that is able to bring in reform What would be like 3 things that you would want to immediately do in a reform structure if there was that opportunity?
Wow, that's a good question. Number 1, I would do away with extraordinary rendition. It is so patently illegal. And, this disingenuous wink and nod where we pretend to not know that the prisoner's going to be tortured, that has to end. Number 2, I don't think anybody should be killed with a drone or with any other instrument without having the benefit of trial, even if that trial is in absentia. It shouldn't be up to the United States to have a meeting every Tuesday morning, which is what they do at the National Security Council, where the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism comes up with the kill list, which is what they call it. It's a list of everybody to be killed that week. That's not the American way. That's not what the Constitution has taught us. We're supposed to be a nation of laws. So either we are or we aren't. This is something else that's very important to me. In 1978, Congress mandated the drafting of a human rights report for every country with which the United States has diplomatic relations. I happened to be the human rights officer for 2 years when I was in Bahrain, and I wrote the report, which goes to Congress. So my job as the human rights officer, just as an example, was to go into the Minister of Interior's office and say, Your Highness, you cannot murder a 15-year-old boy for marching in a pro-democracy demonstration. You can't do that. That's a violation of, X, Y, and Z laws. I have to report this to Congress, and they may cut off weapons sales to you. You have to respect human rights. But then maybe the CIA station chief goes in and says, don't pay any attention to the human rights guy. We want you to open a secret prison here, and you can torture people that we turn over to you, and we'll pretend that they're not here, and then you tell us what they say under torture, and we'll give you $10 million. They're going to listen to me, or they're going to listen to the CIA? They're not going to listen to me. So either we're a nation of laws, either we're a nation that respects human rights and civil liberties, or we're not. But we can't pretend to be this shining city on a hill, as Ronald Reagan said, and have secret prisons and extraordinary renditions and torture programs and kill lists and drone programs. Come on. We're not fooling anybody. It has to be one or the other. And so those are the changes I would make.
Wouldn't that increase the threat to the United States? How
Absolutely.
do we protect ourselves?
Absolutely. I would rather be subject to another terrorist attack than to ignore the rights given to us in the Constitution. Sorry. But that's my position. Yes. It was Benjamin Franklin who said, or Thomas Jefferson, I don't remember now, who said that governments that want both security and freedom will end up with neither.
Yeah.
I don't remember who said it, but yeah. Dick Cheney once said, while he was vice president, he would rather keep 1,000 innocent people locked up in Guantanamo than to allow one guilty one to go free. And I'm exactly the opposite. I think that the Constitution, the freedoms that we have enshrined in the Constitution are so important that we have to risk the bad guys going free in order to preserve the rights that the rest of us have.
This is who you are. Like, you just stand by that belief, and where does that come from? It's like it's in your soul.
It is. The truth is, I grew up in a very tightly knit Greek Orthodox family. church was a part of our culture, right? It wasn't just church. It was a meeting place, and, Greek school was there, and all of our friends were Greek. And my parents instilled in me, well, a couple of things. Number one, a real sense of right and wrong. Right? The CIA culture is such that they want you to believe that everything's a shade of gray. And it's not. Some things are black and white. They're just right and wrong. And torture's wrong. Number two, my grandfather, my father's father, was probably my best friend. He died in 1978, and not a single day goes by in my life that I don't think about him. He was so grateful to this country for letting him emigrate here. He had a framed picture of Franklin Roosevelt on the TV until he died. I have it now. But he instilled in us this idea that this country has been so generous to us and so magnanimous that we should only consider public service to pay it back. And so when I was in school, grad school, I only looked for jobs in government, foreign service, CIA. I got approached by the Department of the Navy. I only considered public service because I wanted to give something back. Making money has never been important to me. That sounds like I'm nuts, I know. But the money has just never been a motivator for me. No. I want my children to be proud of me, and I want to leave a legacy that, grandchildren that I don't have yet, or great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren who are going to be born 40 years from now, will be able to look back and say, this was my great-great-grandfather. I can be proud of that guy. That's what I would like.
I think you'll get that. Absolutely.
I hope so. Thank you.
Did your grandfather, was he alive when you joined the agency?
No. He died in 78. I joined in 90. My mother's mother was alive. She was the only one. Everybody else had passed away. My dad's father, too, he used to tell me the craziest stories. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of Sacco and Vanzetti. They were two anarchists who were executed in the 1930s for a crime that they didn't commit. And my grandfather once told me a story about sneaking out of work at the steel mill in Pittsburgh to go to a Sacco and Vanzetti rally. He could have been deported for that. But these guys were innocent, and they were going to be electrocuted, which they were. And he said, somebody had to say something, right? There was a rally, and so he risked everything and went to the rally for Sacco and Vanzetti. That still sticks in my mind, that story. And, there's another story, too, and this is kind of apropos of nothing, but I was always the good kid in my family. My brother was really bad, and now he's, wildly successful music producer and writer, songwriter in LA, multiple Grammy awards, and huge. I was the good kid. But I always had a little bit of a problem with authority. Now I have a serious problem with authority. My grandfather told me this story one time, that he was in line at the Frantic Savings and Loan in Mercer, Pennsylvania in 1934 to cash his paycheck. And while he's standing in this line, John Dillinger comes into the bank with his gang and holds up the bank. And Dillinger told everybody not to worry, that they're there for the bank's money, not their money. And they robbed the bank and they left. Well, Dillinger's like a folk hero, right? He was number one on the FBI 10 most wanted list, and the FBI shot him in the back like the cowards that they are. But this idea, this kind of Robin Hood idea, it always stuck with me. And I so wanted to believe that that story was true. So when it came time to write my first book, I said to my brother, I want to tell that story in the book, but I don't know if it's true. So I took some time off from work, and I drove to Mercer County, Pennsylvania, to the Mercer County Historical Society. And I said, my grandfather used to tell this story about how he was in the bank when Dillinger robbed the bank. And I'd like to know if it actually happened. Not only did I find the newspaper article about the bank robbery, but the newspaper interviewed my grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was able, and I think that's where this distrust of authority comes from. Mm. You know, it was another situation in Pakistan. The night of the Abu Zubaydah raid, we captured, I'm not allowed to say the number, but it was many dozens of Al-Qaeda fighters. 13 safe houses. Dozens upon dozens. We captured so many people. We had to bring them to our safe house. We had a 10-bedroom safe house. We had to bring them in shifts in a paddy wagon, 10 at a time, to interrogate them, take their pictures, their fingerprints, all that stuff. And there was this idiot working for me. His father had been a big muckety-muck in the CIA leadership, and this guy flunked out of the operational training, so they had him in a position called SOO, Special Operations Officer, which means you flunked out of the ops training. So now they do surveillance. They're assistant to the case officer, the operations officer. So this guy flies out with another dozen or so SOOs. And I'm telling him, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. You go here, you go there. They come in with this shift of prisoners, and they all have hoods on. I said, why are they hooded? And this idiot says, we don't want them to see our faces. I said, are you seriously telling me that you have never read the Geneva Convention? Seriously. It is a war crime to put hoods on them. Take the hoods off. He goes, wait a minute, to his men, the guys he was with. Don't take the hoods off. He goes, I'm going to report you to headquarters. I said, oh, I'm already reporting you to headquarters for committing a war crime. Take the fucking hoods off. And we took all the hoods off. We reported each other to headquarters. I got in trouble. Listen, I was as upset as anybody else in the building on 9/11. That doesn't mean we have to turn into Al-Qaeda, which is what happened.
Now, with the advent of AI, technology moving as fast as it is, you mentioned slightly there's something about like drone attacks where it just removes the emotional piece of pulling the trigger or something like that.
Yes,
there's no like face to face. You don't sense the humanity of the other person if there is any, but everybody has a soul.
Yes.
I believe so.
I agree with you.
With technology moving the way that it is, how do you see this impacting the way that we operate to protect our national security, which is important? And considering what you've experienced and been through, do we, keep going down a trajectory of more use of force, or what is it going to look like?
That's a very good question. Probably the most important question that we've addressed here. I'm going to answer it in several different ways. Well, I'm going to preface it by saying I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of a drone program at the Central Intelligence Agency. Mm-hmm. Okay. The CIA has never acknowledged that it has a drone program. So, last week, Lockheed Martin stock dropped $25 in one day. And it dropped $25 in one day for the craziest reason. It's because Elon Musk tweeted a picture of 500 drones flying in formation. And he said, what idiot approved spending $1 billion for every F-35 when the future of warfare is unmanned? Right? Why would we spend $1 billion on an F-35 when you can spend $1 billion for 500 drones, and if they all get shot down, you haven't lost a single person? Well, that sounds kind of cool. But then I would refer people to the story of Daniel Hale. Daniel Hale, I'm proud to say, is a friend of mine. He's the drone whistleblower. Daniel proudly joined the U.S. Air Force and was trained as a drone operator. So he's sitting in some, office park somewhere, operating drones in Afghanistan, just like you said, remotely. You don't see their faces. You probably, in most cases, don't even see any people. You just drone the building that they're in. And he's looking on his screen as he's operating the toggles, and he sees his target. His boss is looking at the same screen in Tampa. And his boss says, fire. And Daniel says, wait a minute, there are 2 little kids there. And his boss says, those aren't kids, those are goats. He said, there are 2 little girls. I'm looking at them right now. And his boss said, fire. And he said, I can't fire. His boss said, fire or be court-martialed. And he fired. And he killed a 9-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl. And their bloody bodies were found 2 hours later when the team finally went to see if they had gotten the target. He had the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. He said, I'm a child murderer. That's really what it comes down to. He said, I murdered 2 little kids in cold blood. Well, now the Pentagon is giving medals out to drone operators. Medals for killing children, for killing people never accused of a crime, killing innocent women and elderly people. We've even killed American citizens with drones, American citizens who have not had their day in court. Anwar al-Awlaki. If Anwar al-Awlaki was the bad guy that the Obama White House said he was, why didn't they charge him with a crime? And then 6 days after killing him, why did they kill his 16-year-old son and his 15-year-old nephew while they were drinking tea at a cafe? They hadn't been charged with any crime. Is that really the country we want to be? I would say no, it's not. And then how do you deal with the crippling PTSD that these drone operators have? You know how many drone operators commit suicide? Constantly they're committing suicide. There's a real price that comes with this new kind of warfare. And I think all around it's a bad idea. Yeah, the technology is amazing. Yeah, the technology, AI, it's moving by leaps and bounds. What about the human cost to all this? There is a human cost, and we're just pretending it doesn't exist.
It's, it is difficult to hear these things. And then at the same time, one needs to think about the race of dominance in this space as well. If not us, who kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the future is going to look like. And hearing your perspective on this and many other issues is, such an honor for me to have you here. I appreciate
the pleasure's mine. Thank you
so much, that you've come here and shared your perspectives. And I always, like, my hope in the podcast is that people will always listen with an open mind, because as individuals who have dealt with other humans, we all have a backstory and we all have something that drives us, and understanding where we come from, maybe we can figure out where we're all headed. And, you were once a gray man, operating in the shadows and known proudly to a few. And you've since emerged as being not just somebody that has served our government and served the people and served this nation, but you really have stood true to who you are as an individual. You are no longer a gray man. If you could do it again, would you want to be a gray man or not be a gray man?
I'm actually of two minds on this issue. On the one hand, I should have gone to film school or something. On the other hand, I'm also a realist. I would love to see the CIA abolished. It's not going to be abolished. I know that the only way to change the CIA is to change it from the inside. And so I probably would do it again. Yeah. And I probably would make myself even a bigger thorn in the side of the enemies of human rights and civil liberties than I was when I was there.
It sounds like you would have made your grandfather proud. And
I did.
Where can everybody find you? I know you're going to probably be starting something of your own. Can we listen to you more regularly?
Yeah, I hope to have a podcast up and going soon, but I put literally everything that I do on Substack. So just, if you go to Substack, just type in John Kiriakou. It's all there.
Mr. Kiriakou. So what is it that makes a good human leader?
I think a good leader is the person who is a lover of human rights, civil liberties, and is willing to sacrifice for them. Yeah, that's what I'll say. There.
John, thank you.
Oh, that was fun.
That was beautiful. It sounds like you.